She married a stranger to escape her father's bullets and found the one man who would stand between her and death itself. In the spring of 1876, Clara Waynfield made a choice that would change her life forever: leap through a window into the unknown, or stay and become the fourth wife of a man whose previous wives all died under mysterious circumstances. By dawn, bleeding and desperate, she stumbled into a cattle camp where a quiet cowboy offered her something she'd never known: protection without price. But when her past came hunting, their pretend marriage would become the realest thing either of them had ever known. Stay with me until the end of this story, and leave a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far Clara's journey has traveled across the world. The first shot tore through Clara's bedroom door at midnight. The second splintered the door frame 3 inches from her head. "Clara Elizabeth Waynfield, you open this door right now!" Her father's voice, thick with whiskey and rage, crashed through the darkness like thunder before a storm. Clara pressed herself against the far wall of her tiny bedroom, her mother's silver revolver clutched in both trembling hands, her heart hammering so violently she could feel it in her throat. "Pa, please," her voice cracked. "Just let me talk to you in the morning when I'm what?" Another shot. This one punched clean through the door, and Clara watched in horror as moonlight streamed through the fresh bullet hole. "When I'm sober enough to listen to you disrespect me? To watch you ruin this family's last chance at salvation?" The door shuddered under the impact of his shoulder. Once. Twice. Clara's eyes darted around the room, her childhood sanctuary, now a trap. The window. It was her only chance. She grabbed the canvas bag she'd packed 3 hours earlier when she'd first heard her father and Harlan Moore discussing the arrangement over cigars and cards in the parlor below. 3 dresses, her mother's Bible. The last letter her mother had written before the fever took her. $43 stolen from the household jar. It wasn't much, but it was everything. "You think you're too good for Harlan Moore?" Her father's laugh was cruel, broken. "That man is offering to clear every debt I owe, every single one, and all you have to do is be a decent, obedient daughter for once in your miserable life." "His last 3 wives died, Pa," Clara shouted back, shocking herself with her own boldness. "Mary Moore drowned in 3 feet of water. Sarah fell downstairs she'd climbed 1,000 times. And Emma was clumsy. Accidents happen." "3 accidents, Pa? 3 dead women, and you want me to be the 4th? The silence that followed was somehow worse than the shouting. Claire could hear her father's heavy breathing through the damaged door. When he spoke again, his voice had gone cold. The voice he used when he was past reason, past mercy. "Harlan Moore is downstairs right now. Paid me $500 just for the promise of you. You come out right now and make yourself presentable, or I'm coming in there and dragging you out. You'll marry him tonight, or by God, I'll—" Clara didn't wait to hear the rest. She threw her canvas bag through the window first, then used the wooden chair to smash out the remaining glass. The sound brought an animal roar from her father and a final, devastating blow to the bedroom door. The top hinge gave way. "You ungrateful little—" Clara climbed onto the windowsill, her nightdress catching on jagged glass. She felt it tear, felt something warm running down her left arm. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Behind her, the door finally surrendered, crashing inward. Her father's massive silhouette filled the doorway, the shotgun raised to his shoulder. "Clara, no!" She jumped. The 12-foot drop stole the air from her lungs and sent lightning bolts of pain shooting up through her ankles. For a moment, the world spun. Dark sky, darker ground, the yellow squares of lamplight from the ranch house windows. Then instinct took over. She grabbed her bag and ran toward the stables, her bare feet silent on the hard-packed dirt. "Clara!" Another shot. This one kicked up dust 2 feet to her left. Her father was firing blind into the darkness, but he was drunk and she was moving. She reached the stable and threw open the gate to the last stall. Rosie, her mother's old mare, 17 years old and half lame, but still the gentlest creature Clara had ever known. "I'm sorry, girl," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face as she threw a blanket over the mare's back, no time for a saddle, and hauled herself up. "I'm so sorry, but we have to run." Rosie seemed to understand. The moment Clara's heels touched her flanks, the old mare bolted from the stable with more speed than she'd shown in years. Behind them, Clara heard her father's bellowing rage, heard Harlan Moore's higher-pitched shouts, heard the sound of horses being saddled in desperate haste. But Clara had a head start, and she had something neither of those men had: absolute nothing to lose. She rode west through the darkness, away from the Waynfield ranch, away from the only home she'd ever known, away from 20 years of her father's drinking and gambling and slow, steady descent into desperation. The night air was cold against her bleeding arms, and she could feel Rosie's labored breathing beneath her, but she didn't dare slow down. Not yet. Not until dawn. The sky was beginning to gray at the edges when Rosie finally stumbled. Clara felt the mare's front legs buckle and managed to throw herself clear just before Rosie collapsed onto her side, her flanks heaving, white foam around her mouth. They'd covered maybe 15-20 miles. Clara had no way to be sure. She'd followed the North Star and kept the mountains on her right, heading toward what? She didn't know. Just away. Always away. Rosie, no, 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 no! Clara crawled to the mare's head, cradling it in her lap. Rosie's dark eyes found hers, and Clara saw the apology there. The old girl had given everything she had. You did so good. You did so good, Mama's girl. You saved me. Rosie's breathing slowed, then stopped. Clara sat in the dirt with her mother's dead horse and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes of tears. Then she stood up, retrieved her canvas bag, and started walking. Her feet were cut and bleeding from the nighttime run. Her arms were still seeping blood through the makeshift bandages she'd torn from her nightdress. She was wearing nothing but that torn nightdress and her mother's old shawl, and she had no idea where she was or where she was going, but she was free, or at least she was away. And for now, that was the same thing. The sun was fully up when she smelled the smoke. Not wildfire, wood smoke. Cook fires. And beneath it, the smell of coffee and horses and cattle. A lot of cattle. Clara crested a low rise and stopped dead in her tracks. Below her, spread across a shallow creek valley, was a cattle camp. Dozens of longhorns dotted the grassland, watched over by men on horseback. Near the creek itself, she could see chuck wagons, bedrolls, men moving with the easy efficiency of a long-established routine, a cattle drive, heading north, judging by the direction the herd was facing. Clara's first instinct was to hide. Strange men, rough men, the kind her father had always warned her about. But then she looked down at herself, bleeding, barefoot, wearing nothing but a torn nightdress, and realized she was long past the point where hiding would do any good. She needed help. Medical attention. Water, food. Shoes, for God's sake. She needed to take a chance on humanity, or she'd die out here in the grasslands, and her father would win after all. Clara straightened her spine, adjusted her mother's shawl to cover as much as possible, and started down the hill toward the camp. She made it about 50 yards before a rider cut her off. The cowboy appeared so suddenly that Clara gasped and stumbled backward, her hand instinctively moving to the revolver she'd tucked into her waistband. But the man held up both hands, palms out, his weathered face showing nothing but concern. "Easy there, miss, easy. Nobody's going to hurt you." He was older, maybe 60, with a gray beard and kind eyes. "Lord have mercy, child. What happened to you?" Clara opened her mouth to answer and found she couldn't. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was finally draining away, leaving behind nothing but exhaustion and pain. Her legs wavered. "Whoa! Whoa!" The cowboy dismounted faster than a man his age had any right to and caught her elbow. "Let's get you to camp. Can you walk? Here, lean on me. That's it. Charlie," he called over his shoulder. "Charlie, get the boss. We got an injured girl here." The next few minutes passed in a blur. Clara was vaguely aware of being guided down the hill, of voices around her, concerned, curious, rough, but not unkind. Someone pressed a canteen into her hands and she drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. Someone else draped a blanket around her shoulders. The world tilted and swayed, and she realized dimly that she was about to faint for the first time in her life. "Make way! Move, damn it!" The new voice cut through the fog, deeper than the others, calmer, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed. Clara felt someone kneel beside her, felt a large, steady hand on her shoulder. "Can you hear me, miss?" Clara forced her eyes to focus. The man before her was tall. She could tell that even with him kneeling. Maybe 30, maybe a bit older. He had dark hair that needed cutting, a weathered face that said he spent all his time outdoors, and pale gray eyes that were studying her with an intensity that should have frightened her, but somehow didn't. There was something solid about him, something safe. "I can hear you," she whispered. "Good. My name is Reed Mercer. I'm the trail boss here. You're hurt. I can see that. But first I need to know, is someone chasing you?" Clara's hand tightened on her mother's revolver. Reed's eyes flicked down to it, then back to her face. He didn't flinch. "If someone is," he continued, "I need to know so I can prepare my men. But either way, you're safe here. I give you my word. Nobody touches you without permission. Understood?" Something in Clara's chest loosened. She'd been running on terror and desperation for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be offered protection without price, help without expectation. A sob caught in her throat. "My father," she managed, "and a man named Harlan Moore. They might be coming." Reed's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in those gray eyes, something dangerous. He nodded once, then turned to the gathered men. "Danny, you and Lopez take the first watch on the back trail. Anyone rides in from the east, I want to know about it immediately. Carlson, bring the medical kit, and someone get some hot food together. Not just coffee, something substantial." He looked back at Clara. "When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning," Clara admitted. "Right. Let's get these arms looked at first, then we'll get some food in you." He stood and offered his hand. "Can you stand?" Clara took his hand. It was calloused, warm, and steady as a rock, and let him pull her to her feet. She swayed again, but his hand moved to her elbow, supporting without crowding. He guided her to a spot near the chuck wagon where someone had laid out a bedroll and helped her sit. "I'm going to clean those cuts," Reed said, kneeling again and opening the medical kit Carlson had brought. "It might sting, just so you know." "I can handle it," Clara said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Reed's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "I believe you can." He began cleaning the glass cuts on her arms with gentle efficiency, his touch surprisingly light for a man with such large hands. "You want to tell me what happened, or would you rather we just stick with names for now?" Clara watched him work. Most men would have been demanding answers, treating her like a problem to be solved. This man was just present, calm, doing what needed to be done. It made her want to talk. "My name is Clara Wainfield," she said quietly. "My father owned a ranch about 20 miles east of here. He's a gambler, a bad one. He accumulated debts he couldn't pay, and when Harlan Moore offered to clear them in exchange for..." She swallowed hard. "In exchange for me, as a wife." Pa agreed without asking me. Reed's hands paused for just a moment, then continued their work. "I'm guessing you disagreed with that arrangement." "Harlan Moore is 53 years old," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "He's been married 3 times before. All 3 wives died under questionable circumstances. When I refused, my father tried to force me. She gestured to her arms. "I went through the bedroom window, rode my mother's old mare until she died. Then I walked until I found your camp." Reed finished bandaging her left arm and moved to her right. "Your mother's mare," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss." The unexpected kindness broke something in Clara. A sob escaped, then another. Reed didn't try to shush her or tell her it would be all right. He just finished the bandaging, then sat back on his heels and waited. When she finally got herself under control, she found him watching her with those steady gray eyes. "I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted. "No family except my father, and he made his choice. I have $43 and the clothes on my back. Well, what's left of them? I know it's not enough to pay for passage anywhere, and I know you don't owe me anything, but I thought maybe..." She trailed off, suddenly aware of how impossible her situation was. "You thought maybe we'd help," Reed finished. "Yes, I thought maybe you'd help." Clara lifted her chin. "But I don't want charity. I can work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. My mother taught me everything before she died. I can earn my keep. Something like respect flickered across Reed's face. Can you cook for 30 men? I can learn. Can you do it while keeping up with a cattle drive that moves 10 miles a day? I can try. Reed studied her for a long moment. Then he stood and offered his hand again. All right then, welcome to the Rocking M Cattle Drive, Clara Wainfield. You'll work for your keep under Cookie. That's our cook. He's been complaining about needing help for weeks. You'll sleep near this chuck wagon where I can keep an eye on things. And if your father or Harlan Moore show up, his expression went cold. Well, we'll deal with that when it happens. Clara took his hand and stood, feeling hope kindle in her chest for the first time since the previous midnight. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Reed, he corrected, we're not formal on the trail. Now, come on, let's get you fed and find you something more suitable to wear. Martha, he called to a woman emerging from one of the supply wagons. Got a job for you. The woman who appeared was perhaps 50, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp blue eyes that took in Clara's appearance in one sweeping glance. But her voice when she spoke was gentle. Lord have mercy, child. You look like you've been through hell and back. Just hell, Clara said. Haven't quite made it back yet. Martha barked out a laugh. I like her already. Come on, honey. Let's see what we can do about getting you decent. Reed, you men clear out and give us some privacy. Reed nodded and moved away, though Clara noticed he didn't go far. Within minutes, Martha had produced a pair of worn but serviceable canvas pants, a cotton shirt that had probably belonged to a slimmer cowboy, and, miracle of miracles, a pair of leather boots only slightly too large. These were my late husband's, Martha explained, helping Clara into the clothes. He was with the drive 2 years ago when a river crossing went bad. Kept his things for sentimental reasons, but I think he'd rather see them used than gathering dust. She looked Clara up and down, then nodded in satisfaction. Better. Not pretty, but practical. You'll do. Clara looked down at herself. She'd never worn pants before. Her father would have had apoplexy. But they were comfortable, allowing her to move freely. The shirt was too big, but Martha belted it at the waist, making it serviceable. The boots pinched a bit, but after the agony of walking barefoot across rough terrain, they felt like a blessing. Thank you, Clara said softly. For the clothes and for not asking questions. Martha's expression softened. Oh, honey, I've got questions. But I learned a long time ago that people running from something need time before they're ready to talk. When you're ready, I'll be here to listen. Until then, she glanced toward where Reed was organizing the men for the day's drive. You picked a good man to stumble across. Reed Mercer's as honest as they come. He says you're under his protection. Every man in this outfit will honor that. Now come on, let's introduce you to Cookie. Fair warning, he's crankier than a bear with a thorn in its paw, but his bark's worse than his bite. Cookie turned out to be a bow-legged man of indeterminate age with a magnificent white mustache and a vocabulary that would make a sailor blush. He looked Clara up and down when Martha brought her over, snorted, and said, You know how to peel potatoes? Yes, sir. Can you make coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in? Yes, sir. Can you cook beans without burning them, biscuits without making them hard as rocks, and bacon without turning it into charcoal? Clara thought of all the meals she'd prepared for her father over the years, trying to make meager supplies stretch, trying to bring him something good to soften his moods. Yes, sir. I can. Cookie studied her for another moment, then grunted. Fine. You'll start by helping with breakfast tomorrow. Today you rest. You look like death warmed over. But starting tomorrow, you pull your weight. I run this chuck wagon like a military operation, and I don't tolerate laziness, complaining, or drama. We clear? Crystal clear, sir. And stop calling me sir. Name's Cookie. Just Cookie. He turned away, muttering about strays and Reed's bleeding heart, but Clara saw him sneak a glance back at her bandaged arms, and his expression wasn't unkind. The rest of that first day passed in a strange, exhausted haze. Clara sat near the chuck wagon, accepting a bowl of stew and hardtack that tasted like the finest meal she'd ever eaten. Cowboys drifted by periodically, some just curious, others offering quiet words of welcome. None of them leered or made inappropriate comments, and she gradually realized that Reed must have laid down the law about her treatment. As if summoned by her thoughts, Reed appeared near sundown leading his horse, He'd been out with the herd all day, and he looked tired but content. He nodded to her as he approached. Settling in all right? Yes, thank you. Everyone's been... Clara searched for the word. Kind. I wasn't expecting kindness. Reed began removing his horse's saddle. That what you're used to? Unkindness? Clara watched him work. His movements were practiced, efficient, gentle with the animal. My father wasn't always cruel, she said slowly. When my mother was alive, he was different. But after she died, he just sort of gave up on everything. The ranch fell apart. He started drinking, gambling, making worse and worse decisions. She paused. I tried to hold things together, but I was just a kid. And then I wasn't a kid anymore, and he started seeing me as a solution to his problems instead of his daughter. Reed was quiet for a moment, brushing down his horse. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Harlan Moore, you said 3 wives died. Mary drowned in shallow water. Sarah fell downstairs. Emma, they said her heart gave out, but she was only 32 and healthy as a horse. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. The rumors around town were never proven, but everyone suspected. Everyone except my father, apparently. Or maybe he just didn't care. He cared more about clearing his debts than protecting his daughter. It wasn't a question. Yes. Reed finished with his horse and turned to face her directly. Did he hurt you? Before last night, I mean. Clara met his eyes. He raised his hand to me exactly once. I pulled my mother's revolver on him and told him if he ever did it again, I'd shoot him while he slept. He believed me. To her surprise, Reed smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. Good for you. A woman should know how to defend herself. The smile faded. But you shouldn't have had to defend yourself from your own father. He shook his head. That's not right. No, Clara agreed quietly. It's not. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the camp settling in around them, men talking, horses nickering, the crackle of cook fires. Clara felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Safety, maybe, or just the absence of fear. She couldn't quite tell. Get some rest, Reed said finally. Tomorrow we move out at dawn. It'll be a long day. Reed, Clara called as he turned to leave. He looked back. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I could be lying about everything. Reed considered the question seriously. I suppose you could be, he said, but I don't think you are. And even if you were, you came into camp barefoot and bleeding, wearing a torn nightdress, clearly running from something. That's not the behavior of someone looking for an easy con. He paused. My mother used to say that how a man treats someone with nothing to offer him says everything about his character. You've got nothing I need, Clara Wainfield, but you need help, and I can provide it. Seems simple enough to me. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Clara staring after him with tears burning in her eyes. In 20 years, no one, not even her mother, had ever expressed such straightforward decency. Her father had always demanded something in return, always had an angle, always made her feel like a burden. But Reed Mercer had asked for nothing, expected nothing, just offered help because help was needed. Clara curled up in the bedroll Martha had provided, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she fell asleep without fear gnawing at her gut. She woke to the sound of Cookie cursing at his fire. The sky was still dark, but Clara could see the faint gray promise of dawn on the eastern horizon. Around her the camp was stirring, men rolling out of bedrolls, horses being saddled, the low murmur of morning conversation. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her legs and the throb of pain in her bandaged arms. Well, don't just sit there, Cookie bellowed when he spotted her. You said you could help, girl. Time to prove it. Clara scrambled to her feet and hurried over. Cookie thrust a giant coffee pot into her hands. Fill this from the creek. Get it on the fire, and add 6 handfuls of grounds. And when I say handfuls, I mean full handfuls. These cowboys don't want tea. They want coffee, strong enough to grow hair on their chests. Move! For the next 2 hours, Clara worked harder than she'd ever worked in her life. She made coffee, mixed biscuit dough, fried bacon, scrambled eggs in massive cast-iron skillets, and sliced leftover beef for sandwiches the cowboys would take with them during the day's ride. Cookie barked orders constantly, but she noticed he also positioned himself to take the heaviest loads, spare her still healing arms, and demonstrate techniques when she struggled. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, 30 cowboys had been fed, the chuck wagon had been packed, and Clara was sweating, exhausted, and oddly exhilarated. Cookie looked her over, then gave a grudging nod. "You'll do," he said. "You'll do just fine." High praise, apparently, judging by Martha's surprised laugh. The drive moved out shortly after breakfast, a slow-moving river of cattle and cowboys heading north toward Wyoming. Clara rode in the chuck wagon with Cookie, who kept up a running commentary about every member of the outfit. "That's Danny up front. Best scout we've got. Can read sign like some men read books. The Mexican fellow next to him is Lopez, quiet as a church mouse, but faster with a rope than any white man I ever saw. Those two over on the left are the Carlson brothers, Tom and Jack. Can't tell them apart. Don't even try. That tall drink of water is Martin. He's our wrangler, handles the remuda. And of course, you've met Reed." Clara's eyes found Reed without conscious effort. He rode at the head of the herd, sitting his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd been born in a saddle. Even from a distance, she could feel the authority he commanded, not through force, but through sheer competence and respect. "He's a good man," Cookie said, following her gaze. "Best trail boss I ever worked for, and I've worked for a lot of them over 40 years. Fair, smart, doesn't take unnecessary risks with his men or his herd. You could do worse than to trust him." I already do trust him," Claire said, surprising herself with the admission. Cookie smiled into his mustache, but said nothing. Yeah. The days fell into a rhythm. Up before dawn to help Cookie with breakfast. Travel 10 or 12 miles while the herd grazed and moved. Stop at midday for a quick meal. Continue until evening when they'd set up camp and Clara would help prepare dinner for hungry, tired men. Then clean up, prep for the next morning, and collapse into her bedroll. It was exhausting. Clara's arms ached from lifting heavy pots. Her legs protested the constant standing. Her hands developed blisters from kneading bread dough and scrubbing pans in creek water. But she was free. No one told her she was worthless. No one looked at her like she was a burden or a commodity to be sold. The cowboys treated her with respect, sometimes awkward, sometimes overly formal, but always respectful. Martha checked on her daily, making sure her cuts were healing properly. Cookie taught her trail cooking techniques while pretending he wasn't. And Reed was there. Not hovering, not intrusive, but present. He'd appear at breakfast for his coffee, and he'd nod to her. "Morning, Miss Wainfield." Always formal, always proper. In the evenings, he'd sometimes sit near the fire while she cleaned up, checking over the day's progress with Cookie or discussing the route with Danny. He never sought her out specifically, but somehow he was always nearby when she needed a heavy pot moved or a supply box lifted. And every night, before he headed to his own bedroll, he'd do a walk around camp, checking on his men, checking on the herd, and checking on her. Just a quick nod, a quiet, "Sleep well, Miss Wainfield," and then he was gone. It should have felt suffocating, being watched over like that. Instead, Clara found it comforting. For the first time in years, someone was looking out for her without expecting anything in return. 2 weeks into the drive, her father found them. Tick. Clara was elbow-deep in dishwater when Danny came thundering into camp, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. "Reed, Reed, riders coming from the east, 2 men pushing hard." Every head in camp turned. Reed materialized from somewhere, his expression calm but his hand resting on his revolver. "How far?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. They're riding hard." Reed's eyes found Clara across the camp. She stood frozen, water dripping from her hands, her heart suddenly pounding. He crossed to her in 4 long strides. "Is it them?" She couldn't speak, could only nod. Reed's jaw tightened, then he turned to his men, and his voice rang out with absolute authority. "Listen up. We've got visitors coming in, and they might be looking for trouble. I want every man armed and ready, but nobody draws unless I give the word. Lopez, take the herd further west. I don't want them spooked. Martha, get Clara out of sight." "No." Clara's voice came out stronger than she expected. "No, I won't hide. If it's my father, he needs to see I'm still here, that I didn't die out here like he probably hoped." Reed looked at her for a long moment. "You sure?" I'm sure. All right, but you stay by me. Understood? Clara nodded. Reed reached out and, for the first time since they'd met, took her hand. His grip was warm, steady, anchoring. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you're under my protection. That means something. Trust me. I do, Clara whispered. They stood together in the center of camp, surrounded by 30 armed cowboys who'd positioned themselves with the casual efficiency of men who'd dealt with trouble before. Martha stood to Clara's left, holding a Henry rifle with the ease of long familiarity. Cookie had positioned himself near the chuck wagon, his shotgun resting across his lap. The minutes stretched like hours. Then Clara heard it. Hoofbeats, coming fast. 2 riders crested the ridge and pulled up short, staring down at the assembled camp. Even from a distance, Clara recognized her father's bulky form and Harlan Moore's slight weasel-like frame. Stay calm, Reed murmured. Deep breaths. You're safe. Her father spurred his horse forward, Moore following close behind. They rode straight through the scattered campfires and pulled up 10 feet from where Clara stood with Reed. Her father looked worse than she'd ever seen him, unshaven, red-eyed, his clothes stained and rumpled. Moore looked pristine as always, but his eyes held a cold fury that made Clara's skin crawl. Clara, her father's voice was hoarse. Get on this horse. We're going home. No. The word came out clear and strong. Her father's face darkened. That wasn't a request, girl. You're my daughter, and you're coming home right now. She's not going anywhere. Reed's voice was ice cold. You need to turn around and ride out. Her father's attention shifted to Reed for the first time, and Clara saw the flicker of recognition. Her father was a gambler and a drunk, but he wasn't stupid. He could count the armed men surrounding him. He could see that this wasn't going to be easy. This is between me and my daughter, her father said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. No, Reed said. It's between you and me now. The lady has made her choice, and you'll respect it. Lady? Harlan Moore spoke for the first time, his voice dripping with contempt. That's no lady. That's stolen property. I paid good money for her, and I intend to collect. The temperature in the camp seemed to drop 20 degrees. Clara heard the distinctive sound of hammers being cocked on revolvers all around them. Reed's hand tightened on hers, then released. He took one step forward, placing himself directly between Clara and the 2 men. Let me make this real simple for you gentlemen, Reed said, his voice deadly calm. First, Clara is a human being, not property. Second, she's currently under my protection, which means you'll go through me to get to her. Third, and most important, he paused, and his next words were soft but carried to every corner of the camp. She's my wife. The world stopped spinning. Clara's breath caught. Her father's mouth fell open. Harlan Moore went rigid in his saddle. You're lying, her father said. I'm not. Reed didn't even glance back at Clara. His eyes stayed locked on the 2 men. We were married 3 days ago at a trading post about 20 miles west of here, legal and binding, which means she's now Clara Mercer, and she's no longer any concern of yours. Clara's mind reeled. They hadn't been married. There was no trading post. This was a lie, a complete fabrication, and yet Reed delivered it with such absolute conviction that even she almost believed it. Prove it, Moore said sharply. I don't have to prove anything to you, Reed replied. But if you're determined... He turned finally, his eyes meeting Clara's. Clara, come here, sweetheart. The endearment should have sounded false. Instead, it sent warmth flooding through her chest. She moved to stand beside him, and he slipped his arm around her waist with easy familiarity. To anyone watching, they looked like what they were pretending to be, a married couple. Tell them, Reed said gently. Clara looked up at this man who'd given her safety, given her work, given her dignity. And now he was offering her the ultimate protection, his name. She didn't understand why, didn't understand what he stood to gain, but in that moment, standing in front of her father and Harlan Moore, she made a choice. It's true, she said, her voice clear. Reed and I were married last week. I'm his wife. Her father's face went from red to purple. You lying little... You can't be married. You're 20 years old. You needed my permission. I'm 21 as of 2 months ago, Clara said, realizing it was true. She'd turned 21 in March, and there'd been no celebration, no recognition, just another day of dodging her father's demands. I didn't need anyone's permission, and even if I did, you forfeited any claim to make decisions for me when you tried to sell me to a man who murdered his last 3 wives. That's slander, Moore hissed. I could have you arrested for stating what the whole county knows. Martha's voice cut through the tension. She'd stepped forward, her rifle still cradled casually. I grew up in that area, Mr. Moore. I knew Sarah Moore before she married you. She was my cousin. So you be real careful about threatening this girl, or we might need to have a longer conversation about what really happened to Sarah. Moore's face went white. Her father looked between them, clearly calculating odds and not liking what he found. Finally, he turned back to Clara, and for just a moment she saw something that might have been regret flicker across his face. Clara, he said, more quietly now. Please. I'm sorry. I was desperate. The debts. I'm about to lose everything. Just come home. We'll figure something else out. For a moment, just a moment, Clara felt the old familiar pull. The desire to fix things, to save him from himself, to be the good daughter who made everything right. Then she remembered the sound of gunfire, the feeling of glass cutting into her arms, the absolute certainty that her father cared more about his debts than her life. No, Pa, she said softly. I'm not coming home. You made your choice. Now I've made mine. Her father stared at her for a long moment. Then he jerked his horse's reins, turning away. Fine. You want to throw your life away on some dirt-poor cowboy, you do that. Don't come crying to me when you realize what a mistake you've made. I won't, Clara said. Moore lingered a moment longer, his cold eyes fixed on her. This isn't over, he said quietly. Marriages can be annulled. And when it is, I'll be waiting. Keep waiting, Reed said, but do it somewhere far away from here. If I see you again, Mr. Moore, I'll assume you mean my wife harm, and I protect what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have offended Clara. Instead, it made her feel safer than she'd felt in years. Moore finally turned his horse and followed her father. The two men rode out of camp at a gallop, and Clara watched them disappear over the ridge. Only when they were completely out of sight did she realize she was shaking. Reed's arm tightened around her waist. You did good, he murmured. Real good. Come on, let's sit you down before you fall down. He guided her to a spot by the fire, and Martha appeared with a cup of coffee laced with something stronger. Clara drank it gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. Around them, the camp slowly returned to normal, men holstering weapons, returning to their tasks, though she noticed Danny and Lopez rode out immediately, presumably to make sure her father and Moore kept going. Cookie clapped Reed on the shoulder. Quick thinking, boss. Yeah. Reed rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. About that? He turned to Clara, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. I apologize for the deception, Miss Wainfield. I shouldn't have claimed you as my wife without asking first. It was presumptuous and inappropriate, but I didn't see another way to make them leave without bloodshed. Clara stared at him. You're apologizing. You just saved me. You gave me the one protection they couldn't argue with, and you're apologizing? Well, yes. It was still a liberty I shouldn't have taken. Something broke loose in Clara's chest. Something that had been wound tight since her mother died, maybe longer. And suddenly she was laughing, great gulping laughs that bordered on hysteria. Reed looked alarmed, but Martha just smiled and patted Clara's shoulder. Let it out, honey. You've earned it. When Clara finally got herself under control, she wiped her eyes and looked up at Reed. Mr. Mercer. Reed, you just told my father and a dangerous man that I'm your wife. Don't you realize what that means? Reed frowned. It means they should leave you alone. It also means that if they check, and more will check, and they find out we're not really married, they'll come back. They'll know it was a lie, and they'll have grounds to... She trailed off, seeing understanding dawn in his eyes. To claim you were coerced, he finished quietly. To potentially have me arrested for kidnapping. Yes. They looked at each other across the fire. Cookie muttered something about checking on the herd and made himself scarce. Martha lingered a moment longer, then followed. Gradually, the rest of the camp drifted away, leaving Reed and Clara alone with a problem that was growing larger by the second. "I didn't think it through," Reed admitted. "I just knew I needed to make them leave." "I know, and I'm grateful, but now we have to figure out what to do next." Reed was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "There's a trading post about 3 days north of here. Runs a general store, post office, and I believe the man who runs it is also a circuit judge. Officiated a wedding for one of my men last year." Clara's heart started pounding. "You're suggesting. I'm suggesting we make it real." Reed looked at her directly. "Not a real marriage in the romantic sense, but legal on paper. It would give you protection from your father and from more. They couldn't touch you, couldn't force you into anything. And when we reach Wyoming and you're ready to start over somewhere safe, we could annul it quietly. No harm done." "No harm done?" Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Reed, you'd be tying yourself to a woman you barely know. What if you meet someone you actually want to marry? Then I'd explain the situation and trust she'd understand. Clara, I'm 32 years old. I've been running cattle drives for a decade. I live out of a bedroll most of the year. I'm not exactly prime marriage material anyway." He paused. "But you're running for your life from men who see you as property. You need protection that goes beyond me and my cowboys. You need the law on your side, and the law recognizes marriage." Clara's mind raced. It was crazy. It was impulsive. It was binding herself to a stranger for reasons that had nothing to do with love or affection and everything to do with survival. It was also the smartest thing she could possibly do. "I have one condition," she said finally. "Name it. If you do this, if you marry me to protect me, you let me work for real. Not just helping Cookie. I want to earn my way. I don't want to be a burden or feel like I owe you something I can never repay." Reed's expression softened. "Clara, you've been working for real since the day you joined this outfit. You think Cookie lets just anyone work in his chuck wagon? You've earned your place here 3 times over." He held out his hand. "But if it makes you feel better, we'll call it a job. Fair wages for fair work. Deal?" Clara looked at his extended hand, calloused, honest, offering her something she'd never had. A real choice, a path forward. Freedom wrapped in the unlikely package of a marriage of convenience to a cowboy she'd known for less than a month. She took his hand. Deal. And with that handshake, Clara Waynefield's path changed forever. The trading post appeared on the horizon 3 days later, shimmering in the afternoon heat, like a mirage that might disappear if Clara blinked too hard. She'd spent those 3 days in a strange state of suspended reality, going through the motions of cooking and cleaning, laughing at Cookie's terrible jokes, accepting Martha's quiet support, all while her mind circled endlessly around the decision she'd made. She was going to marry Reed Mercer, a man she'd known for less than 3 weeks. A marriage built not on love or even affection, but on survival and pragmatism. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt an odd sense of calm, as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. Reed rode up beside the chuck wagon as they approached the settlement, his horse matching Cookie's easy pace. He looked up at Clara, his expression carefully neutral. "You can still change your mind," he said quietly. "No judgment, no hard feelings. We'll figure out another way to keep you safe." Clara studied his face, the weathered skin, the serious gray eyes, the mouth that rarely smiled but somehow made each smile worth waiting for. In 3 weeks, she'd learned things about this man that most people never knew about their spouses. She knew he woke before dawn every morning and checked on his men before seeing to his horse. She knew he never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. She knew he split his own dinner portion with the youngest cowboy when supplies ran low, pretending he wasn't hungry. She knew he was fair, honest, kind without being soft, strong without being cruel. She knew, in short, that she could do far worse than Reed Mercer, even in a marriage that was only real on paper. "I haven't changed my mind," she said. Something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or respect. He nodded once. "All right, then. Let's go make you an honest woman, Miss Waynfield." The trading post was larger than Clara expected. A sprawling general store with a post office attached, a small boarding house, and a livery stable. A hand-painted sign proclaimed it Patterson's Trading Post and General Mercantile, and beneath that in smaller letters, J. Patterson, Proprietor and Circuit Judge. Reed dismounted and came around to help Clara down from the wagon. His hands on her waist were gentle but impersonal, and she found herself wondering if he'd ever held a woman with real affection, or if his life had been too consumed by cattle and trails and endless horizons to leave room for romance. "You folks need supplies?" A man emerged from the store, tall, thin, with spectacles perched on a prominent nose. "We've got dry goods, ammunition, tobacco. Actually, we're looking for Judge Patterson," Reed said. The man's eyebrows rose. "You found him. James Patterson, at your service. What can I do for you?" "We need you to marry us." Patterson looked between Reed and Clara, his gaze sharpening as he took in Clara's worn clothes, her still healing arms, the way she stood close to Reed but not quite touching. "I see. And this is a voluntary union on both sides?" "It is," Clara said firmly. "No coercion, no threats? You're entering this marriage of your own free will, Miss Wainfield, Clara Wainfield, and yes, I'm entering it freely." Patterson studied her for another moment, then nodded. "Very well. I'll need to see identification if you have it, and there's a $5 fee for the ceremony. We can do it right now if you're ready, or you can take some time to—" "Right now is fine," Reed said. "Right now is perfect," Clara agreed. 20 minutes later, Clara stood in the back room of Patterson's Trading Post, wearing the only dress she owned, a simple blue cotton that Martha had helped her press with heated irons. Martha had also worked some kind of miracle with Clara's hair, taming it into a soft arrangement pinned at the nape of her neck with wildflowers hastily gathered by some of the younger cowboys. "You look beautiful, honey," Martha said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Your mama would be proud." Clara's throat tightened. "You think so?" "I know so. You're doing what you need to do to survive, and you're doing it with your head held high. That takes courage." Martha adjusted one of the flowers. "And between you and me, I've seen the way that man looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. This might have started as convenience, but I don't think it's going to stay that way for long." Before Clara could process that statement, Cookie stuck his head through the door. "They're ready for you." Clara took a deep breath, smoothed her dress one final time, and walked out into the main room of the Trading Post. Reed stood near the counter, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt she'd never seen before, dark blue that brought out his eyes. His hair was still damp, combed back from his face. He looked nervous, she realized with surprise. This confident, unflappable man was actually nervous. When he saw her, something in his expression shifted, softened. He stared at her for a long moment, then seemed to catch himself and cleared his throat. "You look nice," he said, his voice gruff. "So do you." Judge Patterson stood between them, an open Bible in his hands. Behind Reed, a dozen cowboys had crowded into the store, hats in hands, grinning like this was the best entertainment they'd had in months. Danny winked at Clara. Cookie looked suspiciously emotional. Even Lopez, who rarely showed any expression at all, was smiling. "Well then," Patterson said. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was brief. Patterson asked if there were any objections. The cowboys all remained silent, though one of the younger ones stage whispered, "We like her better than you anyway, boss," which earned scattered laughter. He asked Reed and Clara to join hands, which they did, and Clara was startled by the warmth of Reed's palm against hers, the way his fingers wrapped around hers with surprising gentleness. "Reed Mercer, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish? Till death do you part?" Reed's eyes were steady on hers. "I do." "Clara Wainfield, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" Clara thought about the man holding her hands, about how he'd given her safety without asking for anything in return, about how he was binding himself to her now, legally and publicly, to protect her from men who saw her as property, about how this stranger had shown her more kindness in 3 weeks than her own father had shown her in 20 years. "I do," she said, her voice clear and certain. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Reed, you may kiss your bride. For a moment, Reed looked uncertain. This was a marriage of convenience, after all. A business arrangement. But they had an audience of curious cowboys and a judge watching, and Clara realized that for this to be convincing, for this to protect her properly, it needed to look real. She made the decision for both of them. Rising up on her toes, she pressed her lips to his in a brief, chaste kiss. Except the moment their lips met, something electric passed between them. Reed's hands tightened on hers, and for just a second, maybe two, the kiss deepened, became something more than pretense. Clara felt heat flood through her, felt her heart stutter in her chest, felt Reed's breath catch. Then it was over. Reed stepped back, his expression carefully neutral except for the slight flush on his cheekbones. Clara touched her lips, feeling dazed. The cowboys erupted in cheers and applause. Cookie was wiping his eyes openly now. Martha was grinning like a satisfied cat. Judge Patterson closed his Bible and handed Reed a marriage certificate with their names inscribed in careful script. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," he said warmly. "May you have many happy years together." "Thank you," Reed managed. Clara just nodded, still unable to form words. Her lips were still tingling. The celebration that followed was rowdy and good-natured. Someone produced a bottle of whiskey. Someone else had a fiddle. The cowboys toasted the newlyweds with tin cups and terrible jokes about wedding nights that made Clara blush and Reed scowl good-naturedly. Cookie presented them with a slightly lopsided cake he'd apparently been baking in secret, and Martha gave Clara a knowing smile that suggested she saw right through the convenience excuse. As the sun set and the fiddle music picked up, Danny grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her into an impromptu dance, spinning her around the clearing while the other cowboys clapped along. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time since leaving her father's ranch, and the sound of it seemed to surprise everyone, including herself. When Danny finally released her, breathless and dizzy, she stumbled directly into Reed's arms. He'd been watching from the sidelines, but his hands came up automatically to steady her, and for a moment they stood there, his arms around her waist, her hands on his chest, both of them breathing hard. "Having fun, Mrs. Mercer?" he asked, and there was something warm in his voice that made her stomach flip. "Yes," she said honestly. "I am. Is that strange, to be having fun at my own fake wedding?" "It's not fake," Reed said quietly. "It's real in the ways that matter. Legal, binding, witnessed. The only thing that's different is—" He trailed off. "Is that we're not in love," Clara finished. "Right." Reed's arms loosened, but he didn't let go entirely. "That's the only difference." Clara looked up at him, at this man who was now her husband in name and law, if not in heart, and wondered if Martha might be right. Wondered if there was something growing between them that neither of them had planned for or knew quite what to do with. "Dance with me?" she asked impulsively. Reed looked startled. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I, but we're supposed to be newlyweds and people are watching." It was an excuse, and they both knew it. But Reed nodded slowly and led her to the makeshift dance area. The fiddler, reading the moment perfectly, switched to something slower, sweeter. Reed's hand found the small of her back, his other hand gently holding hers, and they began to move. He wasn't lying, he wasn't much of a dancer, but he was steady and sure-footed, and after a moment Clara relaxed into his lead. They swayed together under the darkening sky, surrounded by cowboys and cook fires and the vast openness of the frontier, and Clara felt something shift in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For this, for everything, for giving me a chance at a life." Reed was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "You gave yourself that chance, Clara. You jumped out that window. You rode until you couldn't ride anymore. You walked until you found help. I'm just glad I could be the help you found." The song ended. The moment stretched. Then Cookie called out something about needing help with the food, and the spell broke. Reed released her, gave her a small nod, and walked away to talk to Judge Patterson about trail conditions ahead. Clara stood alone in the firelight, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was still racing, and wondered what exactly she'd just gotten herself into. That night, Judge Patterson offered them the use of a small room above the trading post. A wedding night courtesy, he said with a knowing smile. Reed accepted with thanks, though Clara noticed the tension in his shoulders as they climbed the narrow stairs. The room was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. Reed stopped in the doorway, looking at the bed, then at Clara, then at the floor. "I'll sleep downstairs," he said immediately, "or outside with the men. This is for you." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. "Reed, we're married now. People expect us to share a room. If you sleep downstairs, it'll raise questions we don't want to answer." "Clara, I trust you," she said simply. "And there's barely enough room in this bed for one person, let alone improper behavior. We'll manage." Reed looked like he wanted to argue, but finally he nodded. "All right, but I'll take the floor. The bed is big enough for both of us if we're careful." "The floor is fine." There was something in his voice, something stubborn and protective and maybe a little afraid, that made Clara realize he wasn't worried about her virtue. He was worried about himself, about what sharing a bed might mean, might lead to, might make him feel. "All right," she said softly. "The floor." She changed into her nightdress behind the small privacy screen while Reed made himself a bed out of his bedroll and saddle blanket. When she emerged, he was already lying down, his back to the bed, staring at the wall. She climbed under the thin quilt and blew out the lamp. Darkness fell. Clara lay on her back, listening to Reed's breathing below her, feeling the strange reality of her situation settle over her like that quilt. She was married. To a man she'd known less than a month. A man currently sleeping on the floor to preserve her honor and his own peace of mind. "Clara?" Reed's voice came through the darkness. "Yeah? I promise you, this arrangement, this marriage, I'll never ask for anything you're not willing to give. You understand? This is protection, safety, nothing more." Clara stared at the ceiling, feeling something twist in her chest. Relief, certainly. But underneath it, something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like disappointment. "I understand," she said. "Good. That's good." Silence fell again. This time it lasted until morning. The cattle drive resumed the next day, and Clara quickly discovered that being married to the trail boss changed exactly nothing about her daily routine. She still woke before dawn to help Cookie with breakfast. She still spent her days in the chuck wagon, preparing meals and mending clothes. She still fell into her bedroll each night, exhausted and sore. The only difference was the knowing looks from the cowboys, the way they called her Mrs. Mercer, with varying degrees of sincerity and amusement, and the way Reed seemed to be deliberately avoiding her. Not obviously, he still checked in with Cookie about supplies, still made his evening rounds of the camp, but he no longer sat by the fire while she cleaned up. He didn't meet her eyes at breakfast, and he'd moved his bedroll to the far side of camp, as far from her as possible while still being in the same campsite. Martha noticed, of course. A week after the wedding, she cornered Clara while they were washing dishes in a creek. "So," Martha said casually, "how's married life treating you?" "It's fine." You sleeping in separate bedrolls?" Claire's hand stilled in the dishwater. "That's none of your business." "Oh, honey, everything in a cattle drive is everyone's business. You can't hide anything when 30 people live in each other's pockets for months." Martha handed her another plate. "I'm not judging. I'm just saying that man is running scared, and if you want this marriage to be anything more than words on paper, you're going to have to do something about it." "I don't want it to be more," Clara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Martha gave her a look. "Keep telling yourself that. Maybe eventually it'll be true." Clara opened her mouth to argue, but at that moment Danny came racing into camp on his horse, and the expression on his face killed any response she might have made. "Reed, we got trouble!" Reed emerged from where he'd been checking the remuda, his hand already on his gun. "What kind of trouble?" "Riders, 5 of them, coming up from the south. They're asking for the trail boss, by name." Clara's blood went cold. Reed's eyes found hers across the camp, and she saw her own fear reflected there. 5 riders. Not just her father and Harlan Moore this time. They'd brought reinforcements. "Danny, get the herd moved north fast. Cookie, pack the wagons. Martha, take Clara and—" "No!" Clara stood, dropping the plate back into the wash water. "I'm not hiding. Not this time." Clara, if it's Moore and he's brought hired guns, then you'll need me to testify that I'm here willingly, that this marriage is real. She crossed to him, lifted her chin. I'm not running anymore, Reed. Whatever happens, we face it together. Reed looked at her for a long moment, clearly torn between protecting her and respecting her choice. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. All right, but you stay behind me, and if shooting starts, you get down and stay down. Understood? Understood. The riders appeared 10 minutes later, cresting the ridge at an easy canter. Clara recognized Harlan Moore immediately, still immaculate, still cold-eyed. Her father wasn't among them. Instead, Moore had brought 4 rough-looking men, the kind who wore their guns low and their intentions lower. The camp had assembled as before, armed, alert, forming a protective semicircle. But Clara could feel the difference this time. Last time had been a confrontation. This felt like the prelude to violence. Moore pulled up 20 feet away and surveyed the assembled cowboys with undisguised contempt. Mr. Mercer, we meet again. You're not welcome here, Moore. Keep riding. Oh, I don't think so. You see, I've done some investigating since our last encounter. Very interesting what I discovered. Moore's smile was sharp as broken glass. There's no record of any marriage at Patterson's trading post before the day you claim to have married Miss Wainfield. Rather convenient timing, wouldn't you say? We were married at Patterson's, Reed said evenly. He's a circuit judge. It's all legal and recorded. Oh, I don't doubt you went through some ceremony. But I wonder, did you consummate this marriage? Because if not, it can be annulled quite easily. Lack of consummation is grounds for annulment in every territory and state. Clara felt Reed go rigid beside her. Around them she heard the cowboys shifting, hands moving to weapons. Our private life is none of your concern, Reed said, his voice dangerously quiet. It is when I have a legal contract with Clara's father promising me his daughter in exchange for clearing his debts. A contract that predates your convenient marriage. Moore pulled a folded paper from his jacket. Signed, witnessed, and entirely binding. Clara Wainfield was promised to me, and one way or another, I intend to collect. That contract is worth less than the paper it's written on, Clara spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. You can't contract away a person like property. I'm not a horse or a piece of land to be sold. Your father had legal guardianship over you. He had the right to make decisions on your behalf. I'm 21 years old. He had no such right. Moore's expression flickered, just for a moment, with uncertainty. Then it hardened again. Nevertheless, I paid good money for you, and I will be compensated. Either you come with me now, or I'll see Mr. Mercer arrested for kidnapping, fraud, and theft of property. She's not property, Reed's voice cracked like a whip. And if you try to take her, you'll have to go through every man here. I was hoping you'd say that. Moore gestured to his hired guns. I've brought adequate persuasion. The tension in the camp ratcheted up another notch. Clara could hear hammers being cocked, see men settling into fighting stances. This was going to end in bloodshed. People, good people, were going to die because she'd refused to be sold like livestock. She couldn't let that happen. Wait, Clara said. She stepped forward out of Reed's protective shadow. Mr. Moore, you say you want compensation for money paid to my father. How much? Clara, no. Reed grabbed her arm, but she shook him off. How much? She repeated. Moore studied her, calculating. $500, plus interest, given the inconvenience and delay. Call it $700 total. I'll pay it. The camp erupted. Reed was saying absolutely not. Cookie was cursing. Martha was demanding to know where Clara would get that kind of money. But Clara ignored them all, her eyes fixed on Moore. Give me 3 months, she said. I'll earn the money working this drive and the next. $700, every penny. And in exchange, you tear up that contract with my father and leave us alone. Forever. Moore considered this. What guarantee do I have that you'll pay? My word. Not good enough. Then Reed's word, Clara said. I'm his wife now. My debts are his debts. And unlike my father, Reed Mercer honors his commitments. She felt Reed's shock, but she didn't look at him. Couldn't look at him. She just committed him to a debt he'd never agreed to, bound him to her even more thoroughly than their paper marriage had. But it was the only way she could see to end this without bloodshed. Moore glanced at Reed. And you'll vouch for this debt, Mercer? Clara held her breath. Reed could refuse, could tell her she had no right to speak for him, could let Moore take her rather than saddle himself with a $700 debt for a woman he barely knew. Instead, Reed moved to stand beside her. His hand found hers, fingers interweaving, presenting a united front. "My wife's word is my word," he said quietly. $700 paid within 3 months. And then you disappear from our lives permanently. We have a deal? Moore studied them both for a long moment. Then, to Clara's shock, he smiled. "You know what? We have a deal. I'll even put it in writing, properly witnessed. 3 months from today, Clara Mercer, will pay me $700 in exchange for the destruction of her father's contract and my permanent departure. If she fails to pay," his smile widened, "well, then we revisit the question of annulment and compensation." He wheeled his horse around. 3 months, Mrs. Mercer. I'll be counting the days." The 5 riders departed at a gallop, leaving behind a camp full of stunned, angry cowboys and one absolutely furious trail boss. The moment the riders were out of sight, Reed released Clara's hand and walked away without a word. She watched him go, her heart sinking. Cookie put a hand on her shoulder. "Give him time, girl. That was a hell of a thing you just did." "I had to," Clara whispered. "People were going to die." "Maybe. But you also just committed that man to a debt that's going to take a lot more than 3 months to pay off. Trail boss wages are good, but they ain't that good." Clara knew. She'd done the math in her head even as she was making the offer. $700 was more money than she'd ever seen in her life. More than Reed probably made in half a year. She'd bound them together financially, made him responsible for her father's sins, all without asking permission. She'd had no choice. But that didn't mean Reed had to forgive her for it. The rest of that day passed in tense silence. The herd moved north, the wagons rolled, the sun tracked across the sky. But the easy camaraderie that had developed over weeks of trail life was gone, replaced by worried whispers and sidelong glances. Clara went through the motions of her work, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating impossible numbers, trying to figure out how she could possibly earn that much money in 3 months. As the sun set and dinner was served, Reed still hadn't returned to camp. Danny mentioned he was out checking on some strays. Cookie said he was scouting tomorrow's route. Martha just looked at Clara with sympathy and said nothing. Clara cleaned up after dinner, packed away the supplies, prepared the sourdough starter for tomorrow's breakfast. The camp settled into its nighttime routine around her. Men playing cards, telling stories, checking weapons and tack. But the usual laughter was muted. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen between the trail boss and his too impulsive bride. Finally, as Clara was finishing the last of the dishes, Reed appeared at the edge of the firelight. He looked exhausted, his face drawn, his shoulders tight with tension. He glanced around camp, saw everyone trying to pretend they weren't watching, and jerked his head toward the darkness beyond the wagons. Clara dried her hands and followed him. They walked in silence until they were far enough from camp that they couldn't be overheard. Then Reed stopped, ran a hand through his hair, and turned to face her. $700, Clara. Do you have any idea? Yes, she interrupted. I know exactly what I've done. I've tied you to a debt that's going to take us months or maybe years to pay off. I've made decisions about your life without asking. I've been impulsive and presumptuous and probably incredibly stupid. She took a breath. But I couldn't let people die for me. I couldn't let you and the men risk your lives because my father sold me to a monster. So yes, I know what I've done. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Reed stared at her. Then, to her absolute shock, he laughed, a short, sharp sound without humor. Sorry, you're sorry. Yes. Clara, I'm not angry because you created a debt. I'm angry because you didn't trust me to handle it. You jumped in and made a deal without even... He stopped, shook his head. We're supposed to be partners in this, husband and wife, even if it's only on paper. But you made a unilateral decision that affects both of us, and you did it without even looking at me first. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You're right, I should have consulted you, but there wasn't time, and I was terrified, and I just wanted to protect you, all of you. I don't need protecting. I'm not some fragile thing that breaks under pressure. I know that, but Reed, you've been protecting me since the moment I stumbled into your camp. You've given me everything: safety, work, your name, legal protection. You've asked for nothing in return. The least I could do was try to keep you from getting shot over me." Reed was quiet for a long moment, his face shadowed by the darkness. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "That's what this was about? You were trying to protect me?" "Of course. What did you think?" "I thought—" He hesitated. "I thought maybe you were trying to get out of the marriage. Make it untenable so I'd want an annulment." Clara blinked. "What? Why would I want that?" "Because it's not a real marriage, Clara. It's a legal convenience. And now I've dragged you into a massive debt and 3 more months of uncertainty. You'd be well within your rights to want out." "Reed, I don't want out. This marriage might have started as convenience, but it's—" She searched for the right words. "It's the best thing that's happened to me in years, maybe ever. You've treated me with more respect and kindness than anyone else in my life. You've made me feel valuable, capable, safe. Why would I want out of that?" Reed stepped closer, and Claire could see his face now in the moonlight, see the confusion and hope and fear warring there. "You mean that?" "Every word. Even though we're in debt, even though more is going to be watching and waiting, even though this is going to get harder before it gets easier?" "Even though," Clara said firmly. "We're in this together now, for better or worse, remember? We said those words. Those words were supposed to be pretend." "Maybe they started that way," Clara said quietly, "but they feel pretty real to me now." Reed looked at her for a long, breathless moment. Then he did something that shocked them both. He closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. Not romantically, not passionately, but with the desperate relief of someone who'd been carrying a burden alone and had finally been offered help. Clara wrapped her arms around his waist and held on tight, feeling his heart pounding against her cheek, feeling the tension slowly drain from his shoulders. They stood like that for a long time, 2 people who'd been strangers a month ago, now bound together by law and circumstance, and something neither of them quite understood yet. "We'll figure it out," Reed said finally, his voice rough. "The debt, more, all of it. We'll figure it out together." "Together," Clara agreed. They walked back to camp hand in hand, and if the cowboys noticed the change between them, the way Reed's bedroll had mysteriously moved back closer to Clara's that night, the way they sat beside each other at breakfast the next morning, the way Reed's hand lingered on Clara's shoulder when he reached past her for coffee. Well, nobody said a word. But everyone noticed, and everyone smiled. The weeks that followed their confrontation with Moore settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, if anything about Clara's new life could be called normal. The cattle drive pushed north through Wyoming territory, following ancient trails marked by the bones of less fortunate herds and the stories Cookie told around evening fires. The landscape changed gradually, the flat grasslands giving way to rolling hills, then to the first hints of mountains in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped even in late spring. Clara threw herself into work with renewed determination. The $700 debt hung over her like a storm cloud, but she refused to let it paralyze her. She took on extra tasks, mending not just clothes but tack and saddles, helping Martha with laundry, even learning to help Cookie butcher game when the hunters brought in deer or antelope. Every skill she mastered, every task she completed, felt like a small payment against that impossible sum. Reed watched her work herself to exhaustion with a mixture of admiration and concern. On the 10th day after Moore's visit, he found her still awake well past midnight, sitting by the dying fire and stitching up a torn saddle blanket by lamplight. "Clara," his voice was quiet but firm, "it's after midnight. That blanket will still be there in the morning." "I'm almost done," she said without looking up, her needle flashing in the dim light. "You're exhausted. I can see it from here." "I'm fine." Reed crouched beside her, gently taking the blanket and needle from her hands despite her protest. "No, you're not. You're running yourself into the ground trying to earn money that isn't your responsibility to earn." "It is my responsibility," Clara said, finally meeting his eyes. "That debt exists because of me, because of my father's choices, yes, but also because I agreed to pay it. That makes it mine." "Ours," Reed corrected. "We're married, remember? What's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours. That's how this works." But that's not fair to you. You didn't ask for any of this. Reed sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You know what's funny? I've been thinking the same thing about you. You didn't ask to be sold like cattle. You didn't ask to have to run for your life or marry a stranger or take on a massive debt just to stay safe. None of this is fair to you either, but here you are, making the best of it. He paused. So maybe instead of arguing about whose responsibility this is, we just accept that it's both of ours and handle it together. What do you say? Clara felt something tight in her chest loosen. Together, she said softly. Together, Reed agreed. He handed back the blanket and needle. But after you get a full night's sleep, that's non-negotiable, Mrs. Mercer. The name still sent a little thrill through her every time he said it. Clara nodded, setting aside her work. All right, but only if you stop calling me Mrs. Mercer when we're alone. It's too formal. What should I call you then? Clara, just Clara. Unless you want me to keep calling you Mr. Mercer? Reed smiled, one of those rare, genuine smiles that transformed his whole face. Point taken. Good night, Clara. Good night, Reed. But as Clara settled into her bedroll that night, she noticed that Reed's was now positioned directly beside hers, rather than a respectful distance away. When she glanced over at him, he was already looking at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. For warmth, he said quietly. The nights are getting colder as we head into the mountains. It was a flimsy excuse. The night was actually quite mild, but Clara didn't call him on it. Instead, she just smiled and closed her eyes, falling asleep to the sound of his breathing beside her, feeling safer than she'd felt in years. The drive reached the town of Willow Springs on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-June. It wasn't much of a town, maybe 24 buildings clustered around a main street, with a hotel, a general store, a saloon, and a small church marking the corners of what passed for civilization. But it was the first real town they'd seen in 3 weeks, and the men were eager for supplies, a bath, and the chance to sleep under a roof for once. Reed arranged for the herd to be penned in a holding area just outside town, then gave the men leave to visit Willow Springs in shifts. Clara found herself unaccountably nervous as they approached the town. She'd gotten so used to the relative isolation of the trail that the prospect of other people, strangers who might ask questions or recognize her name, made her stomach churn. You all right? Reed asked, riding beside the chuck wagon. Just nervous, Clara admitted. What if someone here knows my father? What if word gets back to him that we're here? Your father lost any claim on you the day you married me, Reed said firmly. And even if he did show up, he'd have to get through me first. You're safe, Clara, I promise. Martha, driving the wagon, snorted. Besides, honey, you look completely different than you did a month ago. Sun-browned, wearing pants, your hair all pinned up practical-like. Your own father probably wouldn't recognize you if he passed you on the street. Clara supposed that was true. The pale, frightened girl who'd stumbled into their camp in a torn nightdress seemed like a different person now. She'd gained weight, cookies cooking and regular meals had filled out her frame. Her arms had healed, leaving only faint scars. Her hands were calloused from work. She looked, she realized, like she belonged out here, like she'd been doing this all her life. The realization made her sit up straighter. She wasn't that terrified girl anymore. She was Clara Mercer, trail wife, camp cook, and partner to a man who'd built a life from nothing but hard work and integrity. She had nothing to be ashamed of. Willow Springs Hotel was a 2-story affair with a restaurant attached and a proprietor who took one look at Reed and immediately started calculating profit margins. Trail boss, are you? How many rooms you needing? 3, Reed said. 1 for me and my wife, 1 for our camp cook and wagon boss, and 1 for my lead scout and wrangler. The rest of the men can make do with the livery or camping outside town. The proprietor's eyes flickered to Clara, taking in her unusual attire and sun-darkened skin. Your wife, you say? That's right. Reed's tone didn't invite further questions. He pulled out several bills. We'll also need baths, laundry service, and dinner for 5 in your restaurant tonight. Can you accommodate? Of course, of course. The proprietor, mollified by the sight of ready money, became obsequious. Right this way, Mr. Mercer, Reed Mercer. They were shown to a room on the 2nd floor, larger than the one at Patterson's trading post, with an actual bed that looked almost comfortable, and a window overlooking the main street. Reed set down their saddlebags and immediately checked the window locks and the door, his trail boss instincts on full display. "It's safe," Clara said, amused. "We're not camping in the open anymore." "Habit," Reed admitted, looking slightly sheepish. "I've been sleeping under the stars so long that walls make me nervous." A knock at the door announced the arrival of a hotel worker with a large copper tub and several buckets of steaming water. The woman, middle-aged, kind-faced, smiled at Clara as she set everything up. "Bath's ready, ma'am. I can bring more hot water if you need it, and there's soap and towels in the cabinet." "Will you be needing help with your hair?" Clara almost said yes before catching herself. She couldn't afford luxuries like having someone else wash her hair. Every penny needed to go toward the debt. "No, thank you. I can manage." The woman nodded and left. Clara stared at the tub with naked longing. A real bath, hot water, soap. It had been weeks since she'd had more than a quick wash in a cold creek. "Go ahead," Reed said, reading her expression. "I'll go check on the men and arrange for supplies. Take your time." He left before she could respond, pulling the door closed behind him with a decisive click. Clara didn't waste another second. She stripped off her dusty clothes and sank into the hot water with a groan of pure bliss. The heat seeped into her sore muscles, washing away weeks of trail dust and exhaustion. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink, washed her hair twice, and let herself just float in the warmth until the water finally began to cool. By the time Reed returned an hour later, she was dressed in her one clean dress, the blue one from the wedding, with her hair brushed out and drying in loose waves down her back. She'd never seen herself look quite so feminine since leaving her father's ranch, and something about it made her feel vulnerable and powerful all at once. Reed stopped in the doorway, his hand still on the knob, and just stared. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks under his scrutiny. "I can change back to pants if this is too—" "No," Reed said quickly. "No, you look beautiful." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them seemed ready to address. Clara tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly shy. "Thank you. The bath is still set up if you want to use it. I can have them bring fresh water." "That'd be good." Reed cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at her. "We're having dinner downstairs in an hour. Cookie, Martha, Danny, and Martin will be joining us. Sort of a celebration. We're making good time, the herd is healthy, and we're more than halfway to the summer grazing lands." "That sounds nice," Clara said. Reed nodded, still not quite meeting her eyes, and started gathering clean clothes. Clara slipped out to give him privacy, making her way downstairs to the hotel restaurant where Martha was already waiting. "Well, don't you clean up nice," Martha said with an approving smile. "Bet Reed nearly swallowed his tongue when he saw you." "Martha." "What? I've got eyes, honey. That man has been looking at you like you hung the moon for weeks now. About time you noticed." Clara sat down, fiddling with her napkin. "It's not like that between us. We're partners. Friends, maybe, but it's not romantic." Martha gave her a long, knowing look but said nothing. Fortunately, Cookie arrived before she could press the issue, followed quickly by Danny and Martin. They all looked strange without their trail dust, scrubbed clean, wearing actual town clothes, their faces bearing the pale marks where hat brims usually shaded their skin. Reed appeared last, and Clara's breath caught. She'd never seen him in anything but work clothes, but he'd somehow procured a proper shirt and jacket, and he'd shaved for the second time since she'd known him. He looked civilized, almost scholarly, though his weathered skin and calloused hands told the truth about his life. His eyes found hers immediately, and something passed between them, a spark of awareness, of appreciation, of something that had been building slowly but was suddenly impossible to ignore. Then Danny said something that broke the moment, and they all settled in for dinner. The meal was simple but delicious, real beef steaks instead of trail jerky, potatoes with butter, fresh bread, and coffee that didn't taste like boiled dirt. The conversation flowed easily, full of trail stories and gentle ribbing. Clara laughed until her sides ached at Cookie's impersonation of one of the younger cowboys trying to impress a girl at their last supply stop. But underneath the laughter and camaraderie, she was acutely aware of Reed beside her. His knee occasionally brushed hers under the table. His hand touched her back when he reached for the salt. His attention returned to her again and again, as if pulled by a magnet he couldn't resist. When dinner ended and the others drifted off to the saloon for cards and whiskey, Reed and Clara found themselves walking slowly back upstairs, neither quite ready to return to the confines of their shared room. "Thank you for tonight," Clara said as they reached their door. It was nice to feel normal for a while, to just be people having dinner instead of people running from something or working towards something. "We should do it more often," Reed said. "Once we deliver this herd and get paid, before we head back for another drive, we could—" He hesitated. "We could see what it's like to just be married for a while. Without the trail, without the work. Just us." Clara's heart started beating faster. "Reed, are you saying—" A door slammed somewhere down the hall, followed by raised voices. Reed's hand immediately moved to his gun, his body shifting to place himself between Clara and the source of the noise. But the voices faded, moving away from them, and after a moment Reed relaxed. "Sorry, still jumpy." "It's all right." Clara reached out and took his hand, not pulling him, just holding, offering comfort and connection. "Come on, let's go inside before something else breaks the moment." Reed's fingers tightened on hers. "Clara, what I was trying to say—" "I know," she interrupted gently, "and I want that too. To see what we could be without all the complications. But right now, can we just—" She gestured at the door. "Can we just go to bed? Together this time, not you on the floor or across camp, just together." Reed looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for something, permission, maybe, or certainty. Whatever he found must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly and opened the door. The room was dark except for moonlight streaming through the window. Clara lit a single lamp, casting a warm glow over the bed, the real bed with actual sheets and pillows. It looked simultaneously inviting and terrifying. "I can still take the floor," Reed offered, but his voice lacked conviction. "The floor was fine when we were pretending," Clara said, turning to face him. "But you said it yourself. This is real now. The marriage, the partnership, all of it. So unless you don't want to share the bed—" "I want to," Reed said quickly. Too quickly, judging by the flush that crept up his neck. "I mean, it makes sense. It's a big bed. We're both adults. We can be practical about this." Clara smiled. "Very practical." They changed for bed with careful modesty, Clara behind the screen again, Reed facing the wall. When they finally slid under the sheets from opposite sides, they left a careful foot of space between them. Clara could feel the heat radiating from Reed's body, could hear every breath he took, could sense the tension in him that matched her own. "Good night, Clara," Reed said, his voice rough. "Good night, Reed." Silence fell. Clara lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm her racing heart. This was ridiculous. They were married. They'd made it through confrontations with her father and Harlan Moore. They'd navigated a cattle drive together. Surely they could handle sharing a bed without anything improper happening. Except Clara was discovering she wasn't entirely sure she wanted things to stay proper. The more time she spent with Reed, the more she admired him, his strength, his integrity, his unexpected kindness. And lately, she'd found herself noticing things she shouldn't be noticing. The way his muscles moved when he lifted heavy loads. The rare but devastating impact of his smile. The calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work and honest labor. "Clara?" Reed's voice came through the darkness. "Yes? You're not sleeping either, are you?" "No." "Want to talk about why?" Clara turned her head to find him already looking at her, propped up on one elbow. In the moonlight, his eyes were dark and unreadable. "I'm thinking about things I probably shouldn't be thinking about," she admitted. "That makes two of us." Reed was quiet for a moment. "This is harder than I expected." "What is?" "Being married to you but not being married to you. Wanting you but having no right to want you. Lying here 2 feet away and knowing I should keep that distance but wishing I didn't have to." Clara's breath caught. "Reed, I know we agreed this was just convenience, just protection. But Clara, somewhere along the way, it stopped being just anything, at least for me." He paused, and she could see him gathering courage. "I care about you. Not as a responsibility or a partner or even just a friend. I care about you the way a husband should care about a wife. And I don't know what to do about that because we never agreed to—" Clara closed the distance between them, cutting off his words with a kiss. It was different from their wedding kiss. No audience, no pretense, no need to perform for anyone else. This was real and raw and full of weeks of building tension finally finding release. Reed made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, his hand tangling in her hair, his mouth moving against hers with a hunger that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara whispered, "I care about you too. Have for weeks now. I just didn't know if you felt the same." Reed laughed, a sound of relief and wonder. "How could you not know? I move my bedroll next to yours. I watch you constantly. I stand between you and danger without even thinking about it. Clara, you've become the most important thing in my life, and it terrifies me." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I could lose you. Moore could find some legal loophole. Your father could cause more trouble. Something could happen on the trail, and I've only just found you. The idea of losing you now?" He shook his head. "I don't think I could bear it." Clara cupped his face in her hands, feeling the roughness of his stubble under her palms. "You're not going to lose me. I'm here, Reed. I'm your wife, really and truly your wife, and I'm not going anywhere." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring rather than devouring. When they finally settled back under the covers, Clara's head rested on Reed's shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her. The careful distance between them had vanished entirely. "We should get some sleep," Reed murmured, though he made no move to release her. "Probably," Clara agreed, but she snuggled closer instead. They fell asleep that way, tangled together in a real bed for the first time, and when morning came, neither wanted to acknowledge how thoroughly their carefully platonic arrangement had been shattered. The next 2 days in Willow Springs passed in a pleasant haze. Reed handled business with local ranchers, arranging for the final leg of the drive. Clara helped Martha stock up on supplies, carefully counting every penny and looking for ways to stretch their budget. In the evenings, she and Reed walked the town's small streets together, not saying much but not needing to, just being together in a way they couldn't on the trail. On their last night before leaving, they returned to their hotel room to find an envelope had been slipped under the door. Reed picked it up, frowning at the unfamiliar handwriting. When he opened it, his expression went carefully blank. "What is it?" Clara asked, but she already knew. The dread in her stomach told her before Reed spoke. "It's from Moore." Reed's voice was tight. "He's here, in town, and he wants to meet with us tomorrow morning before we leave." Clara's hand flew to her throat. "How did he know we were here?" "He's been following us, or having us followed." Reed's jaw clenched. "Probably wants to remind us about the debt. Make sure we don't forget what we owe him." "As if we could forget," Clara said bitterly. That night, despite sharing the bed again, they lay awake in tense silence. Clara could feel Reed's anger radiating off him in waves, could sense him running through scenarios and strategies in his head. She wanted to comfort him, but didn't know how. This was her fault, after all. Her father's debts, her desperate bargain, her burden that had become his. Morning came too quickly. Reed dressed in grim silence, checking his revolver with practiced efficiency. Clara put on her trail clothes, the pants and shirt she'd been wearing since joining the drive. Somehow, wearing the blue dress would have felt like going to her own funeral. They met Harlan Moore in the hotel restaurant. He was already seated when they arrived, sipping coffee and looking as immaculate as ever. His cold eyes swept over them with proprietary interest that made Clara's skin crawl. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer," he said, gesturing to the seats across from him. "So good to see you again. Please, sit." Reed and Clara sat, and Clara noticed that Reed positioned himself slightly in front of her, always protecting, even in a public restaurant. Moore noticed too, and his thin smile suggested he found it amusing. "I won't take much of your time," Moore said. "I know you're heading out today. I just wanted to check in on our agreement, make sure we're all clear on the terms." "We're clear," Reed said flatly. $700? 3 months from the day we made the deal. That gives us another 10 weeks. "Indeed, and how is your fundraising coming along?" "That's none of your business." "Oh, but it is my business, Mr. Mercer. You see, I've been thinking about our arrangement, and I've realized I may have been too generous with my terms." Moore set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. 3 months is quite a long time. A lot can happen in 3 months. You could disappear into the wilderness. You could decide the debt isn't worth honoring. You could... "We gave you our word," Clara interrupted, her voice shaking with anger. Reed Mercer's word is gold in this territory. If he says he'll pay, he'll pay. I'm sure he will, but I'd like some collateral, just to ensure your good faith. Reed's hand moved to his gun. What kind of collateral? Moore smiled. Nothing too onerous. I simply want Mrs. Mercer to sign a document acknowledging the debt and agreeing that if payment isn't received in full by the deadline, she'll return with me to fulfill her father's original contract. Voluntarily, of course. No force necessary. Absolutely not, Reed said. Then I'll be forced to take legal action. Fraud, breach of contract, I have excellent lawyers, Mr. Mercer. They'll tie you up in court for years. You'll spend everything you have and more just fighting me. Is that what you want? Clara felt trapped. Signing Moore's document would essentially be signing away her freedom if they couldn't pay, but refusing might mean dragging Reed through endless legal battles that could destroy him financially. Either way, Moore won. I'll sign, she said quietly. Clara, no. I'll sign, she repeated, looking at Reed, because we're going to pay. We're going to earn every penny of that $700, and we're going to hand it to him with interest just to see the look on his face. And when we do, that document won't matter because the debt will be paid. Reed looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Clara's expression stopped him. He turned back to Moore, his eyes hard. Fine. She'll sign your document, but I want it in writing that once we pay the $700, all contracts, her father's and this new one, are destroyed, and you never contact us again. Ever. Done. Moore produced 2 documents from his jacket. The first Clara's acknowledgement of debt, the second an agreement to destroy all contracts upon payment. Both were professionally drafted, witnesses' lines ready. Clara read through them carefully, looking for loopholes or tricks. To her surprise, they seemed straightforward. She signed her name, Clara Mercer, not Wainfield, with a firm hand. Reed signed as witness. Then Reed signed the second document, and Clara witnessed his signature. Moore collected the papers with evident satisfaction. A pleasure doing business with you both. I'll see you in 10 weeks. I'll be staying at the Montana House Hotel in Cheyenne. You can find me there when you have my money. He stood, tipped his hat mockingly, and walked out. The moment he was gone, Clara felt her composure crumble. Her hands started shaking, and she gripped the table to steady them. We're going to do this, Reed said quietly, his hand covering hers. I don't know how yet, but we're going to earn that money and pay him off. I swear it, Clara. How? Clara's voice came out as barely a whisper. Reed, even if we both work every day for the next 10 weeks, we can't possibly... Then we'll find another way. Reed's voice was steel. I'm not letting that man have you. Not now, not ever. If I have to sell everything I own, if I have to take out loans or call in every favor anyone's ever owed me, I will do it. You're my wife, and I protect what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have bothered Clara. Instead, it made her feel cherished, valued, worth fighting for. She turned her hand over so their palms pressed together, fingers interweaving. Together, she said. Together, Reed agreed. They left Willow Springs an hour later, the cattle drive resuming its northward journey. But something had changed. The easy camaraderie of the previous weeks was gone, replaced by a grim determination. Every man in the outfit had somehow heard about Moore's visit, and their attitude toward Clara shifted from friendly acceptance to fierce protectiveness. Danny took it upon himself to teach Clara how to shoot properly, spending his free time helping her improve her aim with her mother's revolver. If that snake Moore comes around again, you'll be ready, he said grimly. Cookie started paying Clara actual wages from his own pocket. Not much, but every penny counted. You've earned it 3 times over, he said when she tried to refuse. Even the youngest cowboys started bringing her their mending without being asked, pressing coins into her hand for the work. For the fund, they'd say, and Clara would thank them with tears in her eyes. Martha watched all of this with knowing eyes. One evening, while Clara was once again working by firelight, she sat down beside her. You know what you've done, don't you? Martha asked. Made a terrible bargain with a dangerous man? No. You've made these men care about you, really care. They're not just following orders from their trail boss anymore. They're fighting for you, for your freedom, for your future with Reed. Martha paused. That's a powerful thing, honey. Don't take it lightly. Clara looked around the camp, at the men who'd become her family, at the life she'd built from nothing, at Reed checking the herd in the distance. I don't, she said softly. I don't take any of it lightly. The drive pushed on toward Wyoming's summer grazing lands, but now every mile felt weighted with urgency. They had 10 weeks to earn an impossible sum, 10 weeks to save Clara's freedom, 10 weeks to prove that their marriage, born of desperation and convenience, had become something worth fighting for. And somewhere behind them, Clara knew, Harlan Moore was watching and waiting, counting down the days until he could collect what he believed was owed to him. But he didn't know Clara Mercer the way these men did. He didn't know her strength, her determination, her absolute refusal to give up. And he certainly didn't understand what she'd found in this rough band of cowboys and one quietly devoted trail boss. She'd found a family, a purpose, a home. And she'd be damned if she'd let anyone take that away from her now. The summer grazing lands appeared like a promised land after weeks of hard travel. Rolling meadows thick with grass, clear streams cutting through valleys, and mountain peaks standing sentinel in the distance. Reed brought the herd to a stop in a broad valley where other outfits had already established their camps. And for the first time since leaving Texas, the relentless forward push ceased. But Clara felt no relief. She had 8 weeks left. 8 weeks to earn money that seemed increasingly impossible to obtain. The small amounts the cowboys had been paying her for mending added up to maybe $40, a drop in the bucket compared to what they needed. Reed seemed to be thinking the same thing. That first night in the grazing lands, after the herd was settled and the men were celebrating the end of the drive with extra rations of whiskey, he pulled Clara aside. "I've been doing calculations," he said without preamble. "The outfit will pay me $300 for bringing the herd up successfully. That's mine to do with as I please. Cookie and Martha will each get about $75. Danny and the lead hands another $50 each." Clara's heart sank. Even pooling everything, they'd still be short. "That's not enough." "No, but there are other ranches here, other outfits. They always need extra hands for various jobs, breaking horses, building corrals, helping with difficult births. I can hire myself out." "Reed, you've been working nonstop for 2 months. You need rest." "I'll rest when you're safe." His voice was flat, brooking no argument. "I've already talked to a few of the other trail bosses. There's work available. Hard work, but it pays." Clara grabbed his arm. "Then I'm working too. There must be things I can do, cooking, laundry, anything." "Clara, don't you dare tell me to rest while you work yourself to death for my debt," she said fiercely. "We're in this together, remember? That means we both work. We both fight. We both do whatever it takes." Reed looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. Together. But you promise me something. If it becomes too much, if you need to stop, you tell me. Your health and safety come before any debt. Only if you promise the same thing." Reed's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile under different circumstances. "Deal." The next morning, Clara discovered that word had spread through the grazing lands about the trail boss's wife and her predicament with Harlan Moore. She wasn't sure how. Cookie swore he hadn't said anything, and Martha claimed innocence. But somehow every outfit in the valley knew that Clara Mercer needed to earn $700 in 8 weeks or face being dragged back to a dangerous man. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A rancher named Douglas from Montana approached Clara at breakfast. "My wife just had our 4th baby," he said bluntly. "She's exhausted and could use help with cooking and cleaning for a few weeks. Pay is $2 a day plus meals. You interested?" Before Clara could answer, a woman from another outfit interrupted. "I run the laundry for 3 different ranches. I'll pay you $1.50 per day if you help me. It's hard work, but honest." A grizzled old cowboy with a magnificent beard stepped forward. "I breed horses. Need someone to help exercise the young ones, get them used to being handled. $1 a day, and you can keep any tips if the horses sell well." Offers kept coming. Someone needed help with their vegetable garden. Another outfit needed mending done. A family needed a temporary school teacher for their children. The work was varied, exhausting, and would consume every waking hour, but it was available, and it paid. Clara looked at Reed, who'd been standing silently beside her, his expression carefully neutral. When their eyes met, she saw the conflict there. pride that people were willing to help, concern about her taking on too much, and something else. Gratitude, maybe, that they weren't alone in this fight. "I'll take as much as I can handle," Clara said, addressing the assembled group. "Thank you, all of you. You have no idea what this means to me." An older woman with steel gray hair and kind eyes stepped forward. "We know exactly what it means, honey. Most of us came west running from something or toward something. We take care of our own out here, and you're one of us now." The woman's name was Sarah, and she turned out to be the unofficial matriarch of the summer grazing lands, a widow who'd outlived 2 husbands and now ran a successful ranch with her 3 sons. She took Clara under her wing immediately, helping her organize the various jobs into a schedule that was brutal but manageable. "You'll work for the Douglas family mornings," Sarah said, writing everything down in a small notebook. "That's cooking and light cleaning. Afternoons, you'll help me with laundry. My girls can show you the routine. Evenings, you can do mending for whoever needs it. Sundays, you rest. And I mean it, girl. Sundays, you rest, or you'll collapse before the 8 weeks are up." Clara wanted to argue about Sundays, but Sarah's expression made it clear this wasn't negotiable. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now, let's talk about your husband. That man is going to work himself into an early grave if someone doesn't manage him, and I'm deputizing you for that job." As if summoned, Reed appeared, leading his horse. He'd already secured work with an outfit that needed help breaking a string of wild horses. Dangerous, exhausting labor that paid well precisely because it was so risky. "Reed Mercer, you stop right there," Sarah commanded. Reed stopped, looking startled. Sarah marched up to him and poked him in the chest with one weathered finger. "You're a good man doing right by your wife. I respect that. But you're no good to her dead, and horse breaking on no sleep is a good way to get killed. So here's what's going to happen. You work mornings only. Afternoons, you rest. Evenings, you can pick up odd jobs if you're not too tired, and you eat 3 full meals a day. I'll be checking with Cookie." Reed opened his mouth to argue, caught Clara's expression, and closed it again. "Yes, ma'am." "Smart man." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Now both of you, eat some breakfast. You start your new schedules tomorrow, and you'll need your strength." That night, lying in their shared tent, they'd upgraded from individual bedrolls to an actual tent with a cot, a luxury that felt almost decadent. Clara did calculations in her head. "If I make $2 a day from the Douglas family, $1.50 from laundry, and maybe another $1 from mending, that's $4.50 a day," she murmured. "Times 6 days a week is $27 weekly. Times 8 weeks is—" Her heart sank. $216. "Reed, even with your earnings, we're going to be short." Reed rolled over to face her in the darkness. "We'll find a way to make up the difference. Maybe some of the horses I break will sell early, and I'll get a bonus. Maybe you'll get tips. Maybe more will get hit by lightning and solve all our problems," Clara finished bitterly. "That too." Reed reached out and found her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Hey, look at me." Clara turned her head, barely able to make out his features in the dim starlight filtering through the tent fabric. "We're going to make this work," Reed said quietly. "Even if I have to sell my saddle, my horse, every possession I own. Even if I have to take out loans or work for years to pay them back. You are not going back to Harlan Moore. I won't allow it." "Reed, I can't ask you to give up everything for me." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Clara, don't you understand?" His hand tightened on hers. "You're not a burden I'm carrying. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Before you, I was just drifting, trail to trail, season to season, with nothing to show for it but stories and saddle sores. But you gave me a purpose, a reason to want something more than just the next drive. You gave me a future worth fighting for." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't deserve you. That's where you're wrong. We deserve each other. And we're going to prove it by beating Moore at his own game." They fell asleep holding hands, and when morning came, they threw themselves into work with renewed determination. Clara's days became a blur of endless labor. She'd wake before dawn to help Cookie with breakfast for Reed's outfit, then hurry to the Douglas ranch where she'd cook for a family of 6, clean their small house, and help Mrs. Douglas with the baby. The woman was exhausted and grateful, often pressing extra coins into Clara's hand with whispered thanks. Afternoons were spent at Sarah's laundry operation, backbreaking work that involved hauling water, heating it over fires, scrubbing clothes against washboards until her hands were raw, and hanging everything to dry. But Sarah and her daughters made the work bearable with constant conversation, bawdy jokes, and a steady stream of gossip about everyone in the valley. It was through Sarah that Clara learned about the other women like her, women who'd come west running from bad situations, women who'd built new lives through sheer determination. There was Margaret, who'd escaped an abusive husband and now ran a successful boarding house. There was Chen Li, who'd survived the Chinese Exclusion Act and now operated the best restaurant in 3 territories. There was Three Birds, a Cheyenne woman who'd married a white rancher and now managed the largest horse breeding operation in Wyoming. "You're in good company," Sarah told Clara one afternoon while they folded sheets. "Western women are tough because we have to be. But we're also free in ways women back east can't imagine. No one here cares about your past or judges your choices. We just care about your character and your work ethic. And honey, you've got both in spades." Evenings, Clara would return to camp exhausted but unable to rest. She'd set up her mending station by the fire and work until her eyes blurred, fixing torn shirts and pants for anyone who asked. The Cowboys would keep her company, telling stories and making sure she didn't fall asleep with a needle in her hand. Reed's schedule was equally punishing. Every morning he'd head to the breaking corrals where the wild horses were kept. Clara would watch from a distance sometimes, her heart in her throat, as he climbed onto the back of 1,000 pounds of furious horseflesh. He was good. Better than good, actually. He had a way with the animals, a patience and calm that eventually won them over. But it was dangerous work, and Clara saw him come back more than once with bruises, cuts, and a limp he tried to hide. "You need to rest," she told him one evening after he'd been thrown particularly hard. "I'm fine," he said, though he winced when he sat down. "You're hurt." "Just bruised. I've had worse." Clara knelt in front of him and started checking his ribs, ignoring his protests. Sure enough, she found swelling on his left side. "You might have cracked a rib." "Might have, but it'll heal. I've got work tomorrow." "Reed, if you get seriously injured, you can't work at all. Then what good are you to either of us?" He caught her hand, stilling her worried examination. "Clara, I know you're concerned, but I've been breaking horses since I was 15. I know my limits." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm standing, you're pushing way past them." They stared at each other, both stubborn, both exhausted, both terrified of failure. Finally, Reed sighed. "All right, I'll take tomorrow morning off. Let the ribs start healing, but then I'm back at it. We don't have time for extended rest." It was a compromise Clara had to accept. She helped him to their tent, made him lie down, and spent the next hour applying cool compresses to his bruised side. By the time she finished, he was asleep. His face relaxed in a way it never was when he was awake anymore. Clara sat beside him, watching him sleep, feeling the weight of their situation pressing down on her like a physical force. They were drowning in work and debt and impossible deadlines, and she was beginning to wonder if they'd survive it, even if they succeeded in raising the money. 3 weeks into their new routine, disaster struck. Clara was at the Douglas Ranch, elbow deep in bread dough, when Mrs. Douglas let out a cry. Clara rushed to the bedroom to find the woman pale and shaking, blood seeping through her nightgown. "Something's wrong," Mrs. Douglas gasped. "The bleeding, it shouldn't be this much. Please, get the doctor." Clara ran. The nearest doctor was in the small town 5 miles away, and Clara didn't have a horse. She ran the entire distance, her lungs burning, her legs screaming, arriving at the doctor's office nearly delirious with exhaustion and fear. The doctor, a competent woman named Dr. Helena Price, took one look at Clara's face and grabbed her medical bag. "Where?" "Douglas Ranch. Mrs. Douglas. She's bleeding badly. Postpartum complications, I think." They borrowed horses and rode hard. By the time they arrived, Mr. Douglas was frantic and the baby was screaming. Dr. Price went to work immediately, barking orders at Clara, who obeyed without question despite having no medical training. Hours passed in a blur of boiling water, clean bandages, and increasingly worried looks from the doctor. Finally, as the sun set, Dr. Price emerged from the bedroom looking exhausted but satisfied. "She'll live. It was close, but she'll recover fully with rest and proper care." Mr. Douglas nearly collapsed with relief. He grabbed Clara's hands, tears streaming down his face. You saved her. If you hadn't gotten the doctor so fast. He couldn't finish. Dr. Price put a hand on Clara's shoulder. You did well. Quick thinking and decisive action. Have you ever considered medical work? I'm just a trail cook, Clara said, suddenly aware of how close she'd come to watching someone die. You're more than that, much more. Dr. Price turned to Mr. Douglas. Your wife will need help for the next few weeks. Someone to cook, clean, and watch for complications. Can Clara stay? Clara's heart sank. More work meant more money, but she was already stretched beyond her limits. Still, how could she say no? Mrs. Douglas had nearly died, and the family needed help. Of course, she heard herself say. I'll stay as long as you need me. Mr. Douglas offered double her usual wages plus room and board. It was generous, too generous to refuse, but it meant Clara would be living at the Douglas Ranch instead of with Reed, working even longer hours, seeing her husband only on Sundays. When Reed heard the news, he looked gutted, but he understood. You did the right thing, he said, pulling her into his arms. You saved that woman's life. Of course you have to help them. But I'll barely see you. I know, but it's only for a few weeks. We'll manage. They spent that last night together in their tent, holding each other close, neither wanting to acknowledge that their already limited time together was being cut even shorter. When dawn came, Clara gathered her few belongings and moved to the Douglas Ranch, and their separation began. The next 4 weeks were the hardest of Clara's life. She worked from before dawn until well after dark, caring for Mrs. Douglas, managing the household, and helping with the children. The Douglas family was kind and grateful, but Clara felt the absence of Reed like a physical ache. She'd gotten used to falling asleep beside him, to the sound of his breathing in the darkness, to the way he'd reach for her hand even in sleep. On Sundays, they'd meet in the valley between the ranch and the grazing lands. Reed always looked worse, more bruises, more exhaustion etched into his features, but he'd smile when he saw her and pull her into his arms, and for a few hours they could pretend everything was normal. 5 weeks left, Reed said one Sunday, lying in the grass with Clara's head on his shoulder. We're at about $450 now. We're getting close. Not close enough, Clara said. They both knew it. Even with their accelerated earnings, they'd be lucky to reach $600. They were still $100 short with time running out. Something will come through, Reed said, but his voice lacked conviction. That something came from an unexpected source. Dr. Price, who'd kept in touch with Clara throughout her time at the Douglas Ranch, appeared one Sunday with a proposition. I'm opening a clinic in town, she explained. Nothing fancy, just a small building where people can come for medical care, but I need help. Someone to assist with patients, keep records, handle instruments. Someone with steady hands and a calm head in emergencies. She looked at Clara directly. Someone like you. The pay would be $2 a day, and you'd learn actual medical skills. Interested? Clara's mind raced. $2 a day on top of what she was already earning could make the difference. But it would mean even less time with Reed, even more exhaustion piled onto an already crushing load. She looked at Reed, who'd been silent throughout Dr. Price's offer. His expression was carefully neutral, but she knew him well enough now to read the cost calculation happening behind his eyes. Take it, he said quietly. We need every dollar we can get. But Reed, take it, Clara, please, we're so close. Let's finish this. So Clara took the job. Between the Douglas Ranch, Sarah's laundry, evening mending, and now assisting Dr. Price, she worked nearly 18 hours a day. She lost weight. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. Her hands developed permanent calluses and cracks that wouldn't heal. But the money grew. Slowly, painfully, it grew. Reed pushed himself equally hard. In addition to horse breaking, he'd taken on night work, helping build corrals, repairing wagons, anything that needed doing. He sent word through Danny that he was fine, that Clara shouldn't worry, but when she saw him on Sundays, she barely recognized the man who'd married her. He'd lost weight too, his face gaunt and shadowed with exhaustion that went bone deep. We have to stop, Clara said one Sunday, when Reed was so tired he could barely keep his eyes open. This is killing us both. Maybe we should just run. Go somewhere more can't find us. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? Reed shook his head. No, we're going to beat him. We're going to pay every penny and walk away free. We're too close to give up now. How much do we have? Reed pulled out a small notebook where he'd been tracking every dollar earned, every expense, every penny saved. As of this morning, $637. Clara's breath caught. Reed, that's almost enough. We have 2 weeks left. If we keep this pace, we'll make it. We'll actually make it. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt something like hope flicker in her chest. 2 more weeks of this brutal schedule, and they'd be free. Free of debt, free of more. Free to actually live the life they'd been building together. 2 more weeks, she whispered. We can do 2 more weeks. Reed pulled her close, and they sat together in the afternoon sun, both of them battered and exhausted, but finally able to see the end of their ordeal. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The trouble started on a Tuesday, exactly 10 days before their deadline. Clara was at Dr. Price's clinic, helping treat a cowboy who'd been gored by a bull, when Mr. Douglas burst through the door, his face ashen. "Clara, you need to come. Now!" Clara's heart stopped. "Is it Mrs. Douglas? The baby?" "No, it's your husband. There's been an accident at the breaking corrals." The world tilted. Dr. Price was already grabbing her emergency bag. Clara ran for the door, Mr. Douglas's words echoing in her head. Accident. Reed, breaking corrals. The places her mind went were too horrible to contemplate, but she couldn't stop them. Reed thrown from a horse, trampled, kicked in the head, neck broken, spine shattered. She ran faster than she'd ever run in her life, following Mr. Douglas's horse as it galloped toward the corrals. She could see a crowd gathered, could hear shouting, could see someone lying on the ground surrounded by kneeling figures. Clara shoved through the crowd, her heart in her throat, and found Reed lying on his back in the dirt. His eyes were open. Thank God his eyes were open. But his face was twisted in pain, and his right leg was bent at an angle that made her stomach lurch. "Clara," he gasped when he saw her. I'm all right. Just don't move," Dr. Price commanded, pushing past Clara to examine Reed. "Mr. Mercer, can you feel your toes?" "Yes." "Wiggle them for me." Reed's boot shifted slightly. "Good. Now stay very still while I examine this leg." Clara knelt beside Reed's head, taking his hand. It was clammy and shaking. "What happened?" "Horse spooked," one of the other breakers explained. "Threw Reed straight into the fence. Heard the crack from 50 feet away." Dr. Price's examination was quick but thorough. When she sat back, her expression was grave. "Clean break of the tibia and fibula. Could be worse. It's not compound, and there's no apparent damage to the knee or ankle. But Mr. Mercer, you won't be working for at least 6 weeks, maybe 8. 6 weeks. The words landed like a death sentence. They had 10 days to earn the remaining $63, and Reed, their primary earner, was now completely unable to work. Clara saw the same calculation happening in Reed's eyes, saw the devastation, the guilt, the fear. His hand tightened on hers. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Clara, I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything." "No!" Clara's voice was fierce. "You haven't ruined anything. Accidents happen. We'll figure this out." But even as she said it, she had no idea how. Dr. Price and 2 of the stronger cowboys fashioned a stretcher and carried Reed back to camp. The doctor set his leg with grim efficiency, splinted it properly, and gave Clara instructions for care. "Keep the leg elevated. Watch for swelling, fever, or signs of infection. If any of those develop, come get me immediately. He needs to stay off it completely for at least 2 weeks, then we'll reassess." She looked at Clara with sympathy. "I know your situation. This is terrible timing." Terrible was an understatement. That night, after making Reed as comfortable as possible in their tent, Clara sat by the fire and did the math. Without Reed's income, she'd have to somehow earn $63 in 10 days, working only the jobs she already had. It was impossible. Mathematically, literally impossible. Sarah found her there an hour later, staring into the flames. "Heard about Reed. How is he?" "Leg's broken. He can't work for weeks." Sarah sat down heavily beside her. "And your deadline is 10 days. How much short are you?" $63. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I've got about $40 saved up. It's yours." Clara's head snapped up. "Sarah, no. I can't take your savings." "You can, and you will. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. Pay me back when you're able." Before Clara could respond, other people started appearing. Cookie pressed $20 into her hand, his entire wages from the drive. Martha gave her 15. Danny gave 10. One by one, the Cowboys and families who'd come to care about Clara and Reed over the summer appeared with whatever money they could spare. "This is for that time you stayed up all night mending my wedding shirt," one cowboy said. "For teaching my daughter to read," a rancher's wife offered. "For helping birth my mare's foal," another added. "For being kind when nobody else was." Clara tried to refuse, tried to insist she couldn't take their money, but they wouldn't hear it. By the time the last person had contributed, Clara was crying openly, overwhelmed by the generosity of people who had so little themselves. When she counted it all, she had $103, enough to pay more with $40 to spare. She stumbled back to the tent where Reed was half asleep on pain medication and told him what had happened. He stared at her in disbelief. "They gave us the money? Just gave it?" "Not gave, loaned. We'll pay back every penny." "Clara." Reed's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Do you understand what this means? These people, they barely know us, and they're willing to risk their own security to help us. I don't even have words." "It means we're not alone," Clara said softly, climbing carefully onto the cot beside him. "It means we've built something real here, a community, a family, people who care about what happens to us." Reed pulled her close, mindful of his broken leg, and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "We're going to pay every single one of them back," he said fiercely. "It might take years, but we'll do it." "I know we will, but first we pay more. We end this. And then—" Clara paused, feeling a future opening up before them for the first time since this nightmare began. "Then we figure out what comes next. Together." "Together," Reed agreed, and kissed her forehead. "Always together." 8 days later, with Reed on crutches and his legs still in splints, they rode into Cheyenne to settle their debt once and for all. The Montana House Hotel stood at the corner of Cheyenne's main street like a monument to prosperity. 3 stories of red brick with gleaming windows and a doorman in an actual uniform. Clara helped Reed down from the wagon, acutely aware of how out of place they looked. Reed was gaunt and pale from pain and medication, leaning heavily on crutches that Cookie had fashioned from sturdy pine. Clara herself wore her best dress, the blue one from their wedding, but it was faded now, patched in places, and couldn't quite hide the toll the last months had taken on her body. They'd brought witnesses. Sarah had insisted, and Reed had agreed. Cookie, Martha, and Danny stood behind them like a protective wall, all dressed in their cleanest clothes, all wearing expressions that dared anyone to cause trouble. In Clara's canvas bag was $700 in mixed bills and coins, every penny accounted for, counted 3 times to be certain. "You ready?" Reed asked quietly. Clara looked up at the hotel, imagining Harlan Moore somewhere inside, probably expecting them to fail, probably already planning how to collect his human collateral. Rage burned through her exhaustion, clean, clarifying rage that straightened her spine and steadied her hands. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's end this." The hotel lobby was everything the frontier wasn't: polished wood, thick carpets, crystal chandeliers that caught the afternoon light. The desk clerk took one look at their group, and his expression shifted from welcoming to suspicious. "Can I help you folks?" "We're here to see Harlan Moore," Reed said. "He's expecting us." The clerk's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Moore is in the restaurant taking his lunch. I'm not sure he wants to be disturbed." "He'll want to see us," Clara interrupted. "Trust me." Something in her voice made the clerk reconsider. He gestured toward a set of double doors. "Through there. But if there's any trouble—" "There won't be," Reed said firmly. He said, "We're just here to settle a debt." The restaurant was half full of well-dressed diners eating from china plates with silver utensils. Conversations died as Clara's group entered, dozens of eyes tracking their progress across the room. Clara kept her head high, her hand tight on the canvas bag, refusing to be intimidated by the stares. Harlan Moore sat at a corner table, A newspaper spread before him, a plate of steak and potatoes at his elbow. He looked up as they approached, and Clara saw surprise flicker across his face before his usual cold mask settled into place. "Well, well," Moore said, setting down his fork with deliberate precision. "The Mercers. And with an entourage, I see. I confess, I didn't expect you to actually show up. I thought perhaps you'd run, or Reed here would have another convenient accident that prevented payment." Reed's hand tightened on his crutch, but Clara stepped forward before he could respond. "We're here to pay our debt, in full, as agreed." Moore's smile was thin and sharp. "Are you now? Forgive me if I'm skeptical. $700 is a considerable sum. Surely you don't expect me to believe—" Clara upended the canvas bag on his table. Bills and coins scattered across the white tablecloth, covering his newspaper and plate. The restaurant went completely silent. $700, Clara said, her voice ringing clear in the quiet room. "Count it if you don't believe me. Every penny we owed you, earned through honest work and the generosity of good people. Now honor your agreement and destroy those contracts." Moore stared at the money, and for the first time since Clara had met him, he looked genuinely shocked. He'd expected them to fail, had counted on it, and now his carefully laid plans were crumbling before his eyes. Slowly, with hands that trembled slightly, Moore began counting the money. The restaurant stayed silent, every diner watching the drama unfold. Clara felt Reed's presence solid behind her, felt Sarah and the others forming a protective semicircle, felt the weight of 3 months of desperate work and sacrifice finally coming to fruition. Moore counted twice, then a third time. When he finally looked up, his face was a mask of barely controlled fury. "It's all here." "Yes," Clara said. "It is. Now the contracts." "Perhaps I've changed my mind about our agreement," Moore said coldly. "Perhaps I've decided that—" "You'll honor your word," a new voice interrupted. A distinguished man in an expensive suit stood from a nearby table and approached. "Because I witnessed your original agreement, Mr. Moore, and I'm an attorney. And if you attempt to violate a contract you freely entered into, I'll personally ensure you're prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Moore's face went white. The attorney, Clara would learn later he was Judge Harrison, one of Cheyenne's most respected legal minds, pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. "I've been following this case with interest," Harrison said conversationally. "A young woman fleeing a forced marriage, a trail boss who married her to provide legal protection, and a predatory banker attempting to collect on what amounts to a human trafficking contract. Fascinating stuff. The newspapers would love it, I'm sure." "You're bluffing," Moore said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Try me." Harrison's smile was pleasant and utterly ruthless. "I have connections at every major newspaper between here and San Francisco. One telegram from me, and your name becomes synonymous with the kind of behavior that ended slavery. Think that will be good for your banking business, Mr. Moore?" The silence stretched. Moore's hands clenched on the table, his knuckles white. Finally, with movements that suggested each one caused him physical pain, he reached into his jacket and pulled out 2 documents, Clara's father's contract and the acknowledgement of debt she'd signed in Willow Springs. "Witness destruction, if you please," Harrison said, still pleasant. Moore held the contracts over a candle on the table. The papers caught, blackened, and curled into ash. Clara watched them burn, feeling 3 months of fear and exhaustion burn with them. When the last ember died, she took a deep breath, the first truly free breath she'd taken since jumping through her bedroom window. "We're done here," Reed said, his voice rough with emotion. "You stay away from us, Moore. Forever. If we see you again, if you contact us again, if you so much as think about us again, this attorney will know. And so will every newspaper west of the Mississippi. Are we clear?" Moore's eyes were filled with impotent rage, but he nodded once, sharply. "Good." Reed turned to Clara, his expression softening. "Let's go home." They walked out of the Montana house with their heads high, leaving Harlan Moore sitting alone with $700 he'd never expected to receive and the ashes of his schemes scattered across his lunch. The moment they stepped onto the street, Clara's legs nearly gave out. Reed caught her with his free arm, and they leaned on each other, 2 battered, exhausted people who'd somehow survived the unsurvivable. "It's over," Clara whispered. "Reed, It's actually over. It's over, Reed confirmed. And then he was kissing her right there on the street in front of God and everyone. A deep, claiming kiss that said everything words couldn't. That they'd fought together and won together and would face whatever came next together. When they finally broke apart, Cookie was wiping his eyes openly. Martha was grinning like she'd won the lottery. Danny was whooping loud enough to startle horses. And Sarah was nodding with satisfaction, as if this outcome had been inevitable all along. "Now what?" Clara asked, looking up at Reed. "Now," Reed said, "we figure out what we actually want. Not what we need to survive, not what circumstances demand, but what we genuinely want for our lives. What do you say, Mrs. Mercer? What do you want?" Clara thought about it. About the cattle drives and the trail cooking and the endless horizons. About the community they'd found, the family they'd built from strangers and circumstance. About this man who'd given her everything and asked for nothing in return except the privilege of standing beside her. "I want a home," she said slowly. "Nothing fancy, just a piece of land we can call ours. I want to wake up in the same place every morning. I want to plant a garden and watch it grow. I want to raise chickens and maybe a cow or two. I want—" She paused, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I want a family, Reed. Children who grow up safe and loved and free. Is that too much?" Reed's eyes had gone soft. "That's not too much. That's everything. And Clara, I want it too, all of it, with you. But how? We just gave away every penny we had. We're starting from nothing again." "Not nothing," Sarah interrupted. She'd been hanging back, giving them privacy, but now she stepped forward. "You've got friends. You've got skills. You've got a reputation for hard work and integrity. That counts for something. And—" She pulled an envelope from her pocket. "You've got this." Clara opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a deed to 40 acres of land in the Wyoming foothills, signed over to Reed and Clara Mercer with a note that said simply, "Payment for services rendered and friendship freely given. The Summer Grazing Community." "I don't understand," Clara whispered. "We took up a collection," Sarah explained. "Turns out when you save people's wives, teach their children, heal their animals, and generally make everyone's life better, they want to thank you. That land's been sitting empty for 2 years since the previous owner died without heirs. We bought it from the territory for back taxes. Cost us about $200 total, split among 30 families. It's yours now. All yours." Clara couldn't speak, couldn't even process what she was hearing. 40 acres, land, a home, everything she'd just said she wanted, being handed to her by people who owed her nothing but chose to give anyway. Reed pulled Sarah into a fierce hug, nearly losing his balance on the crutches. "We'll pay you back. Every family. Every penny. I swear it." "You'll do no such thing," Sarah said firmly. "This is a gift, not a loan. You two have given us more than you know. Now you take that land and build something beautiful on it. That'll be payment enough." The next few weeks passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Reed's leg healed slowly, too slowly for his liking, but Dr. Price insisted he follow her orders or risk permanent damage. Claire divided her time between helping Reed with physical therapy exercises and working with Sarah and the other women to gather supplies for their new homestead. The 40 acres turned out to be perfect, a valley with a creek running through it, surrounded by gentle hills with timber for building. The soil was rich, the water clean, and the views stretched for miles. Clara stood in the middle of what would become their home and cried tears of joy and relief and exhaustion. "We can build the house here," Reed said, hobbling up beside her on his crutches. "Face it east so we get morning sun. Put the barn over there by those cottonwoods. Garden plot near the creek where irrigation will be easy. What do you think?" "I think it's perfect," Clara said. "I think it's everything I never dared to dream about." The community that had helped them earn their freedom now helped them build their future. Men from a dozen different outfits showed up to raise the frame of a small but sturdy house. Women brought furniture they could spare. A table here, chairs there, a bed frame someone's grandmother had brought from back east. Cookie contributed pots and pans and basic cooking supplies. Martha donated chickens and the promise of a milk cow once they were settled. By late September, the house was finished. 2 rooms with a loft, a stone fireplace, real glass windows, and a porch where Clara could sit and watch the sunset. It wasn't grand, it wasn't fancy, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and the help of people who'd become family. The night they spent in their new home for the first time, Clara and Reed lay in their new bed and just stared at the ceiling, neither quite able to believe their journey had led them here. "Do you ever think about that night?" Clara asked quietly. "When I jumped through the window?" "All the time," Reed admitted. "I think about how close you came to dying out there in the grasslands, how easily you could have stumbled into a different camp, found different people, how I almost didn't see you that morning. But you did see me, and you helped me. Even though you didn't have to, even though I was a stranger, even though it would have been easier to send me on my way." Reed rolled onto his side, facing her in the darkness. "You want to know a secret? The moment I saw you, bloody and terrified and trying so hard to be brave, something in me just knew. I couldn't have turned you away if I'd tried. It was like my whole life had been leading me to that moment, to you." Clara touched his face, feeling the familiar roughness of his stubble, the strong line of his jaw. "I used to think my father ruined my life. But now I wonder if maybe he accidentally gave me the greatest gift. Because if he hadn't tried to force me to marry more, I never would have run. And if I hadn't run, I never would have found you." "Strange way to find a husband," Reed agreed, "but I wouldn't change a single thing, even the hard parts, even more in the debt and breaking my leg. Because it all led us here, to this moment, to this life we're building together." They made love for the first time that night, not out of obligation or expectation, but because they wanted to, because their paper marriage had become real in every way that mattered, because after months of fighting side by side, they finally had the freedom to simply love each other. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Clara whispered, "I'm home. Finally, truly home." "We both are," Reed murmured into her hair. "We both are." Winter came early that year, blanketing their valley in snow and giving them time to settle into domestic life. Clara learned to bake bread in her new oven and make preserves from the wild berries they'd picked in fall. Reed healed fully and spent his days building furniture, repairing fences, and planning for spring planting. They developed routines: coffee on the porch every morning, evening walks to check on the animals, nights spent reading by the fire, or just talking about their dreams for the future. It was during one of those quiet evenings in late January that Clara realized she'd missed her monthly courses. Twice. She sat with the knowledge for a few days, afraid to hope, afraid to be disappointed. But when a third week passed and she woke up nauseous for the fifth morning in a row, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She found Reed in the barn mucking out stalls and just blurted it out. "I think I'm pregnant." Reed dropped the pitchfork, stared at her. "You think?" "I'm late, very late, and I've been sick every morning, and She gestured vaguely at her chest. "Things feel different. I can't be certain without seeing Dr. Price, but I think we're going to have a baby." Reed closed the distance between them in 3 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby! Clara, we're going to have a baby." "Maybe," she cautioned, but she was grinning. "Probably, if Dr. Price confirms it." Dr. Price confirmed it a week later. Clara was approximately 3 months along, which meant the baby had been conceived sometime during those desperate weeks when they'd been working themselves to exhaustion to pay off more. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "We made a life while fighting for our lives," Clara marveled. "Seems appropriate somehow," Reed said, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "This baby is going to be tough as nails, born from parents who survived the unsurvivable." Word of Clara's pregnancy spread through the community like wildfire. Suddenly, their modest home was flooded with gifts: baby clothes, blankets, a beautiful cradle that one of the craftsmen had carved from local wood. Sarah appeared with enough advice to fill a book and the firm instruction that Clara was not to overwork herself. "You nearly killed yourself earning that money," Sarah said bluntly. "You don't get to do that again. This baby needs a healthy mother, and your husband needs his wife. So you rest, you eat well, and you let other people help for once. Understood?" Clara, who'd spent her entire life being told she was a burden, found herself surrounded by people who actively wanted to help her, who considered it a privilege rather than an obligation. It was disorienting and wonderful, and sometimes overwhelming. Spring came with new life bursting from every corner of their valley. Reed planted crops while Clara tended her rapidly expanding garden. The cow Martha had promised arrived, along with a bull calf for breeding. The chickens produced more eggs than they could eat. Their little homestead was thriving. In May, exactly 1 year after Clara had fled through her bedroom window, they received an unexpected letter. It was from Judge Patterson, the man who'd married them at the trading post. Inside was a newspaper clipping and a brief note. The clipping was an obituary. Harlan Moore had died in a riding accident, thrown from his horse and breaking his neck. There were no suspicious circumstances, the article said, though it noted that Moore had been drinking heavily since suffering a business setback the previous fall. Patterson's note said simply, "Thought you'd want to know you're truly free. May your lives be filled with joy. JP." Clara and Reed burned the clipping together, watching the last physical reminder of Harlan Moore turn to ash in their fireplace. That chapter of their lives was finally completely closed. Summer brought their baby. Clara went into labor on a hot August afternoon, with Sarah and Dr. Price both in attendance. Reed paced outside like a caged animal, driving Danny, who'd stopped by to visit, absolutely crazy with his nervous energy. "She's going to be fine," Danny said for the 20th time. "Dr. Price is the best there is, and Sarah's delivered half the babies in the territory. Clara's strong. She'll be fine." "You don't know that," Reed said, turning on him. "Women die in childbirth. Strong women, healthy women. What if—" A baby's cry cut through his panic. Reed froze, his eyes going wide. The door opened and Sarah appeared, grinning. "Congratulations, Papa. You have a son, and your wife is tired but doing beautifully. Come meet your boy." Reed stumbled into the bedroom on shaking legs. Clara lay propped up on pillows, sweaty and exhausted and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced infant with a surprisingly loud voice. "Reed," Clara said softly, "come meet our son." Reed approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at the baby for the first time. His son. His and Clara's. A whole new person who existed because two desperate people had found each other against all odds and built something real from nothing. "He's perfect," Reed whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Clara, he's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Clara asked. They'd discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now looking at their son, Reed knew exactly what he wanted. "William," he said, "after your mother. William Mercer. Billy for short." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You want to name him after my mother?" "She gave me you," Reed said simply. "She raised you to be strong and brave and kind. That's a legacy worth honoring." So William, Billy, Mercer entered the world, welcomed by parents who'd survived everything fate threw at them and emerged stronger for it. The community celebrated his arrival with a party that lasted 3 days. Cookie baked a cake. Martha brought gifts. Sarah declared herself honorary grandmother and announced she'd be checking on the baby weekly, whether they liked it or not. The years that followed were everything Clara had dreamed of during those desperate nights on the trail. She and Reed built their homestead into a thriving ranch. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Martha, and another son they named James. Their home was always full of laughter, always open to travelers who needed help, always a place where people running from bad situations could find refuge. Reed never went back to trail bossing. He'd found something better. A life rooted in one place, surrounded by family and community. He became known as a fair man to do business with, someone whose word was his bond, someone who helped his neighbors without expecting anything in return. Clara became a healer in her own right, studying with Dr. Price and eventually taking over much of the medical care for their valley. She taught other women what she'd learned, passed on the lessons of survival and strength that had kept her alive when everything seemed hopeless. They paid back every penny they'd borrowed, even though their creditors insisted it wasn't necessary. It took 5 years, but they did it, marking off each debt with satisfaction. When the last payment was made, Sarah threw another party. "You didn't have to do this," she told Clara for the 100th time. "Yes, we did," Clara said firmly. "You all saved my life. The least I could do was honor that gift by proving I was worth saving." "Oh, honey," Sarah said, pulling Clara into a hug. You proved that the day you kept fighting when most people would have given up. The rest was just details. On a warm September evening, 20 years after Clara had jumped through that window, she sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Reed sat beside her, their hands intertwined, comfortable in the silence that came from decades of partnership. Their children were grown now, Billy working his own piece of land nearby, Martha married to a good man from town, James studying medicine back east with plans to return and work with Clara. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked, breaking the peaceful silence. Marrying a desperate girl you didn't know? Taking on all the complications that came with me? Reed didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the land they'd built together, the life they'd created from nothing, the family that had bloomed from two people who'd started with nothing but hope and desperation. Not for one single second, he finally said. You want to know what I regret? I regret that your father died before I could show him what you became. I regret that Moore never had to see you thrive. I regret every moment of pain you endured before you found me. But marrying you? He turned to face her, his eyes still holding the same steady devotion they'd held that first morning when he'd offered her protection without price. That was the best decision I ever made. You didn't just become my wife, Clara. You became my freedom, too. Freedom from a life without purpose, without joy, without love. You saved me just as much as I saved you. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the permanent safety of a man who'd stood between her and danger, who'd worked himself nearly to death for her freedom, who'd built her a home and filled it with love. I love you, she said simply. I should say it more often, but I love you. From that first morning when you gave me coffee and asked nothing in return, you were always my home, Reed. Even before we had walls and a roof, you were home. And you were always my wife, Reed replied. From the moment I saw you, even before the ceremony, even before the words. You were mine and I was yours. Everything else was just making it legal. They sat together as the sun set over their valley. Two people who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something bright and lasting from the ashes of their old lives. Clara had escaped her father by becoming a cowboy's wife, but what she'd found was so much more than escape. She'd found freedom, purpose, love. A family built not from blood but from choice, from sacrifice, from the kind of loyalty that could only be forged in fire. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara thought about that terrified girl who jumped through a window with nothing but hope and her mother's revolver. That girl had been running from something. But Clara Mercer, wife, mother, healer, survivor, she'd been running toward something all along. She'd been running toward this, toward home, toward love, toward the life she'd always deserved but never dared to believe she could have. And it had all started with a cowboy who'd offered her protection without conditions, who'd married her to keep her safe, who'd loved her before either of them had words for what they were feeling. She became the cowboy's wife to escape her father. He became her freedom, but together they became something neither had been alone. They became whole, complete, home.